524. Chapter 14. Part 2. Popular belief. Philosophically teaching and the philosophically outlook were at this time by no means confined exclusively to the narrow circles dominated by particular schools. Never more widely or more effectively than in this Hellenistic period did philosophy in one shape or another provide the basis and common medium of a culture that no one of moderate wealth and leisure would willingly be without. Such ideas as educated people of the time generally possessed, dealing in a more connected and definite form with the things of this life and existence that lie beyond the scope of immediate perception, were all drawn from the teaching of philosophy. To a certain extent, this is true also of the current views as to the nature and destiny of the soul. But in the region of the unknowable, philosophy can never entirely replace or suppress the natural, the irrational beliefs of mankind. Such beliefs were in their natural element in dealing with such subjects. They influenced even the philosophically enlightened, and their authority was supreme with the many who in every age are incapable of understanding the disinterested search for knowledge. Even in this supreme period of universal philosophically culture, popular beliefs about the soul still remained in force, unmodified by the speculations or the exhortations of philosophers. They had their roots, these beliefs, not in any form of speculative thought, but in the practice of the cult of souls. And that cult, as it has been described for an earlier stage of Greek life, still went on unaltered and with undiminished vigor. This may be asserted with confidence, though we can produce no very important evidence from the literature of this later period. The character and content of that literature is such that we should hardly expect to find such evidence in it. But for the most part, the literary evidence from which we were able to illustrate the cult of souls in an earlier period may be taken to apply equally to the age with which we are now dealing. Even in its final years, Lucian's pamphlet on mourning bears express witness to the survival of the ancient and sanctified usages in their fullest compass. We hear again of the washing, anointing, 525, and crowning of the dead, the ceremonious lying in state upon the bier, the violent and extravagant lament over the dead body, and all the traditional customs that are still in full force. Last comes the solemn interment of the body, the articles of luxury, burnt together with the corpse of the dead man, or buried with him in the grave articles that had once belonged to him, and which he is supposed to enjoy even in death, the feeding of the helpless soul of the dead, with libations of wine and burnt offerings, the ritual fasting of the relatives only broken, after 3 days, in the banquet of the dead. The dead man must not be deprived of a single one of the customary things, only so can his well-being be fully secured. The most important of these is the solemn interment of the body. This is carried out not only by the family of the dead man, but in many cases also by the society to which he may have belonged. In these times, when the cities sought to make up for the loss of more serious interests in their life, by an often touching care for the immediate, and the insignificant, deserving citizens were frequently honored with elaborate funeral processions in which the municipality took part. The city fathers would then probably decree that representatives should be sent to the survivors and commissioned to express the sympathy of the city in their loss and distract their minds from their grief by a speech. The ritual act of burial, the object of so much pious zeal, was the very reverse of the indifferent matter that philosophy loved to represent it. The sanctity of the place where rest the dead is also a matter of great importance, not only for the dead man himself, but for the rest of the family which desires to be still united in the life of the spirit world, and so inhabits a common burial ground, generally outside the city, very rarely within, but sometimes, even yet, actually inside the house. The founder of a family grave desires the members of it to be joined together in the same grave for at least 3 generations. Those who have a right to be buried there take steps religious and legal or municipal against the profanation of this family tomb and sanctuary, by the burying in it of strangers or the pillaging of the vault, a practice that became increasingly common in the final period of the antique world. There are innumerable grave notices threatening money penalties in accordance with the ancient law of the city, to be paid into the public treasury by those who violate the peace of the grave. No less common are the inscriptions which place the grave and its sanctity, 526, under the protection of the underworld deities, invoking at the same time the most shocking curses, torments, and calamities, both temporal and eternal, against profaners of the holiness of the tomb. Especially the inhabitants of certain districts of Asia Minor, only very superficially Hellenized, give themselves free rein in the accumulation of such violent execrations. In their case, the dark superstitions of ancestral and native worship of gods or spirits may have infected the Hellenes also. It is often the Greeks who become barbarian rather than the barbarians who are Hellenized in the history of Greek relations with these stubborn and barbarous native populations. But even in lands where the Greek population has maintained itself without admixture, such execrations are occasionally to be found in graves. As time went on and the sanctity and peace of the grave began to be more and more seriously threatened, measures of all kinds were taken for its protection. The grave is no mere chamber of corruption. The souls of the dead dwell there, and therefore is it holy. As a sanctuary, it becomes completely sanctified when it has received the last member of the family and is enclosed forever. The family, so long as it lasts, continues to pay the regular soul cult to its ancestors. Sometimes special foundations ensure the payment forever of the soul cult of which the dead have need. Even those whose burial place lies far away from the graves of their own family are not entirely deprived of benevolent care and cult. The presupposition of all cult of souls that the dead survive to enjoy at least a gloomy sepulchral existence in their last resting places everywhere vividly implied. It speaks to us with archaic simplicity from those gravestones upon which the dead, as though still accessible to the sounds of the human voice and able to understand the words of the living, are addressed with the customary words of greeting. Sometimes the dead man himself is provided with a similar greeting which he is supposed to address to the passers-by between him, confined to his grave, and the others who still walk about in the daylight. A dialogue takes place. The dead man is not entirely cut off from the affairs of the upper world. He feels an access of fresh life when he is called by the name that he had once borne in his lifetime, and the memory of which is now preserved only by his gravestone. His fellow citizens call upon him 3 times by name at his burial, but even in the grave, 527, he is capable of hearing the precious sound. On a gravestone at Athens, the dead man enjoins upon the members of the Actors' Guild, to which he had belonged, to call upon his name in chorus whenever they pass by his grave, and to gladden him with the sound of hand-clapping, to which he had been accustomed in life. At other times, the passerby kisses his hand to the dead man, a gesture which denotes the honor paid to a hero. The soul is not merely alive. It belongs now, as primitive and age-long belief expressed it, to the higher and mightier ones. Perhaps this exaltation of the wrath and power of the dead is the meaning of the custom by which the dead are called the good, the honest, krerstoi/. This usage must have become established at an early period, but it is not until these later days that it is first employed as an addition to the simple words of greeting addressed to the dead on gravestones. In this use, it is not uniformly current. It is rare in Attica, at least, on graves of natives of that country, whereas in Boeotia, Thessaly, and the countries of Asia Minor it is frequent and almost universal. In fact, it is natural to suppose that this mode of address, originally a euphemistic title addressed to the ghosts of the dead, who were conceived as quite capable of acting in a manner the very reverse of that attributed to them by the word, was intended to suggest the power belonging to the personality so addressed as one who has risen to a higher form of existence and to venerate him with becoming awe. Section 2. The conception of the departed spirit as one who has been raised to a higher state of dignity and power receives clearer and more conscious expression where the departed one is called a hero. This class of intermediate beings, standing on the border line between mankind and Godhead the world of the heroes, was in no danger of extinction at this period of Greek religious belief. The attitude of mind that could think of certain special souls as withdrawn from the limitations of visible existence and raised to a higher spiritual state remained still vigorous and was even able to give birth to new conceptions. In its original and proper sense, the name heroes never indicated an independent and self-sufficient spirit. Archegits, leader or originator, is his real and distinctive title. The heroes stands at the beginning of a series, taking its origin, 528 from him, of mortal men for whom he is the leader and ancestor. The genuine heroes are the ancestors, whether real or imaginary, of a family or a house. In the heroes, after whom they wish to be called, the members of a society, a clan, or even a whole race honor the archetype of those groups. They are always men of power and influence, prominent and distinguished from other men, who are regarded as having thus entered into the life of heroes after their death. And even in later times, the heroes of a more recent elevation, though they may no longer be the leaders of a train of descendants taking their origin from them, are yet regarded as distinguished from the people who worship them by their peculiar virtue and dignity. To become a hero after death was a privilege reserved for a few great and uncommon personalities who even in their lifetime were not as other men were. The companies of these old and specially chosen heroes did not suffer the fate of forgetfulness, which would have been their second and real death. The love of country and city, undying among the Greeks, attached itself in reverent memory to the illuminated spirits of the past who had once protected and defended their native land. When Messene was refounded in the 4th century, the heroes of the country were solemnly called upon to become inhabitants of the city as they had been before, more particularly Aristomenes, the never-forgotten champion of Messenian freedom. Even at Leuctra, he had appeared in the melee of the fight, doing battle for the Thebans. Before the battle, Epaminondas had secured the favor of the heroines of the place, the daughters of Skedassos, by means of prayer and sacrifice. These were events of the last heroic age of Greek history, but the cult and memory of the local heroes of the Greek countries survived into a much later age. Leonidas was worshipped by the people of Sparta for many centuries, and the champions of the Persian Wars, the saviors of Hellas, were worshipped by their remote descendants. Even in imperial times, the inhabitants of the island of Kos still worshipped those who had fallen to secure their freedom centuries before. Such individual cases allow us to see what was the general rule. The memory and cult of a hero lived on as long as the community remained in existence, whose duty it was to maintain his worship. Even those heroes, a class by themselves who have secured their immortality through their fame in ancient poetry, still retain their cult undiminished. The heroic, 529 figure of Hector still preserved life and reality for his worshippers in the Troad or at Thebes. Even in the 3rd century of our era, the district of Troy and the neighboring coasts of Europe still kept fresh the memory and the cult of the heroes of epic renown. Of Achilles, who had a special fate, we must speak in another connection. Nor did less splendid figures vanish from the memory of their narrower associations of worshippers. Autolycos, the founder of Sinope, retained his cult even in the time of Lucullus. At a quite late period, the relics of the specially popular heroes of the Panhellenic Games were still the subject of many superstitions that bear witness to their continued influence. Heroes to whom healing powers were ascribed continued to do works of healing and to be worshipped, and their number was even extended. Mere local spirits, whose very names had been forgotten, nevertheless lost none of the honor that came to them from their beneficent miracles. Such were, for instance, that Philopregmen of Potidea, who was celebrated by a late poet, or the hero Euodos of Apollinopolis in Egypt, who dispensed good journey to those who honored him in passing by his monument. But all heroes were not yet reduced to such casual salutations from occasional passers-by. In many places, the regular festivals and sacrifices to heroes still survived. Even human sacrifice was still sometimes made to spirits who were held capable of special exhibitions of power. In a few cases, the festivals of heroes are the chief feasts in the annual calendar of a city. The names of heroes, quite as much as of gods, were used in oath-taking at treaties made by Greek cities so long as they retained their independence. Foundations were dedicated to the honor of gods and heroes together. Cult associations called themselves after the heroes they met to worship. Special priests of certain heroes were regularly appointed. Even in the 2nd century, in his Book of Travels, Pausanias is able to inform us of not a few heroes whose cult, as he distinctly says, had gone on unbroken in their cities down to his own day. The annual festival of the heroes who had fallen at Plataea was still celebrated with the greatest pomp in the time of Plutarch, who describes every detail of its archaic ceremonial. And at Sicyon, at the same time, the heroic festival of Aratos, the founder of the Achaean League, was still celebrated, though here the centuries had robbed the occasion of many of its former glories. 530. In all such ceremonies, it was to a single and definite spirit personality that the devotion of men was offered. Each of them received the cult that was due to him by the terms of some old-established and sanctified foundation. Nothing was further from men's minds than the loose and vague conception, expressed sometimes by ancient writers, that all brave men of the past, or all outstanding individuals of whatever time, are to be regarded forthwith as heroes. It was still clearly and consciously felt that elevation to the rank of hero was not a privilege that belonged as a matter of course to any particular class of mankind, but, wherever it occurred, was essentially a ratification of quite exceptional worth and influence displayed already in the lifetime of the hero. Following this conception, even the Hellenistic age added to the number of the heroes by drawing upon the great men of the present. A little earlier Pelopidas and Timoleon had been honored in this way, and now the figures of Leosthenes, Cleomenes, and Philopoemen were raised to heroic glory. Even Aratos, the very incarnation of the sobriety of a too matter-of-fact age, at the end of a life devoted with ardor, but without enduring success to the service of his country, was supposed by his countrymen to have passed over in a mysterious manner into the realm of heroic semi-divinity. As in these cases whole populations honored individuals, so also did narrower and much humbler associations, even in this rationalist age, elevate their helpers and protectors to the rank of hero, and honor them as such. The slaves of Kos thus honored their former comrade and leader Dramachos. At another place, there was a hero who protected all refugees who took shelter with him. At Ephesus, there was a hero who had been a simple shepherd. At the time of Augustus, a benefactor of his city, Athenodoros, the philosopher, had been made a hero by grateful Tarsians after his death. It sometimes happens that a hero of the distant past may find himself confused with a descendant of the same name whom his contemporaries put in the place of his own ancestor and worship in his stead. So little were men grown out of the ideas centered round the cult of heroes that, accustomed to the ever-increasing adoration of the mightier and better, every age was eager to add to their number from the men of the present. They did not always wait for the death of the individual so honored before beginning to address him as heroes. Even in his lifetime, he must enjoy a foretaste of the honor that was destined, 531, to be his after his departure from this life. Thus, Lysander was saluted as a hero after his victory by the Greeks whom he had liberated from the despotism of Athens, and in the Hellenistic age, many a fortunate army commander or mighty king received the same honor. Of the Romans, Flamininus, the friend of the Greeks, was the first to receive it. This misapplication of the cult of heroes to the living then became still further extended. It may be that sometimes it was a real feeling of unusual merit that fired the impulsive temperament of the Greeks. But in the end, the custom became almost a meaningless convention. Even private individuals were thus called hero in their lifetime, and heroic honors, even the foundation of annual athletic games, were granted to living persons almost indiscriminately. And at last, when it was necessary to honor an individual whom the love and passionate regret of a monarch elevated to the rank of hero after his death, then, indeed, the age could hardly do enough in the hyperbole of pomp and ceremony. The funeral honors paid to the dead Hephaestion are an extravagant example of this. If in such cases the limits between the worship of a hero and the adoration of a god seemed almost to have disappeared, we still have evidence of individual cases in which the survivors, without actually naming them heroes, offer to their much-loved dead a memorial cult that hardly falls short of full heroic honors. Nor is it only in such cases as these that we perceive the signs of a tendency to exalt the cult of souls everywhere and to approximate it to the worship of ancestors in the ancient cult of heroes. It emerges clearly enough, for all the brevity of their language, from the multitude of epitaphic inscriptions in which members of simple citizen families are addressed with the title of heroes. At any rate, it betokens an increase in the importance and dignity of the dead when a tombstone expressly announces that an individual citizen has been heroized by the city after his death. And this is what not infrequently happened early in Thera and later on in many other places as well. The same conclusion must be drawn when we hear of associations declaring a dead member to be a hero's, or when a society recognizes a dead man as heroes on the formal motion of an individual. Families, too, become accustomed to giving the name to those of their number that have died before the rest. And a son will thus speak of his father, parents of a son, and a wife of her husband either informally or by a formal declaration naming 532 the dead one as heroes. A higher and mightier form of existence after death must be imagined for the departed when he is thus distinguished so explicitly from the ordinary multitude of the dead still, more so in those cases when the dead man, elevated to a mystic communion with higher forms of life, loses his own name and receives in exchange that of a hero of long-standing honor or even that of a god. In every case that is known to us, the heroizing of a dead person by the city or a society or the family is carried out entirely on the independent authority of those bodies. The Delphic oracle, without whose deciding voice it was hardly possible in early times for the company of the elect to receive any addition, was, in these days when the prestige of the oracle had sunk almost to nothing, no longer applied to for its sanction. The consequence was hardly avoidable that the license thus accorded to corporations and families should widen still further the bounds of the hero's kingdom. In the end, these boundaries broke down entirely. There were cities and countries where it became the custom to apply the title of hero as an epithet of honor belonging to all the dead without distinction. It seems that this extension of heroizing to all the dead first became common in Boeotia, though here it was not quite universal. Thespiae was an exception. Thessalian grave inscriptions give the fullest evidence for the heroizing of the dead of every age and description. But the custom spread to every country populated by Greeks. Only Athens is less unrestrained in the bestowal of the title of hero upon the dead, a title which retained no more of the old and essential meaning of the word, which perhaps survived longest in Athens, than to say that the dead were really now dead. In spite of such indiscriminate application, the name, hero, still continued to be something of a title of honor. An honor, indeed, that was thus accorded to everyone without distinction was in danger of becoming the reverse of an honor. But isolated phrases of a naive and popular character make it clear that a difference was still felt to exist between the hero and those who were not honored with this distinguishing epithet. When the name of hero was thus applied to all the dead, not in exceptional cases, but as a rule, the glory and distinction of which the idea of the hero was thus deprived must have fallen in some measure upon the individual dead, if they, 533, and the heroes could meet on common ground. Thus, even the dissipation of the heroic honor and its indiscriminate application to all the dead is in reality but another indication of the fact that even in the decline of the ancient world the power and dignity of the departed soul had not declined too, but had, on the contrary, grown greater. Section 3. The souls of the departed show their power, and the fact that they are still alive more particularly in the effect that they have on this life and on the living. For the purposes of the cult of souls, they are regarded as confined to the region of the inhabited earth. They continue in the grave or near it, for a time or permanently, and can therefore be reached by the offerings or the prayers of their living relatives. There can be no doubt that at this time men still believed, as they had done since the earliest times, in a kindly relationship between the family and its departed members, an exchange in which offerings were made at the grave by the living and blessings vouchsafed by the unseen. It is true, however, that we only have imperfect records of such calm and comfortable family belief in the survival of the departed and of the part they continue to play in the daily life of their descendants. But there is a more sinister variety of intercourse with the souls or spirits of the dead. They sometimes appear unsought to the living. They can be compelled by the force of magic to use their powers in the service of the living. Both these possibilities apply more particularly to those unquiet souls whom fate or their own hands have deprived of life violently and before their time, to those who have not been consigned to the peace of the grave by ceremonious burial. The enlightened of the time do, indeed, refuse to believe in ghosts and haunting spirits of the dead that wander without rest about the place of their tragic fate, and make their presence disagreeably felt by the living. But the populace, even in such enlightened days, gave the fullest credence to stories in which the existence of a spirit world seemed to reveal its sinister reality, trespassing at times upon the world of the living. Regular folk tales of spectral apparitions, vagrant ghosts of unfortunate souls, vampire-like spirits of the grave, are preserved to us in some numbers, chiefly such as appealed to a perverted philosophy, the insanian sapientia of an outworn age, as seeming to confirm its fancies of an invisible world between heaven and earth. In Lucian's Lover of Lies, the Greybeard, 534, philosophers entertain each other in portentous seriousness with such communications from the spirit world. Plutarch himself is quite seriously convinced of the reality of some ghostly appearances. Philosophy, which at this time was going back to Plato, found in its system of demonology a means of making such old wives' tales intelligible and credible to itself. Finally, the time arrives when the violent and arbitrary interference with the unseen world sorcery and spirit-raising becomes a part of orthodox philosophy. The popular imagination of the Greeks did not have to wait for instruction from their barbarian neighbors, who had reduced the irrational to a system, before they could believe in the summoning of spirits from the deep. Magic in this sense was of extreme antiquity in Greece. But in the fusion and intermixture of Greeks with barbarians, which marked the Hellenistic age, similar and cognate superstitions from all the corners of the earth met together and acquired strength from their union. It was foreign sources, rather than Greek, which chiefly contributed to swell the turbid and noxious stream of sorceries and spirit-raisings, the practical application of an irrational theory of the nature and being of the soul in separation from the body. The lofty heaven of the old Greek gods was beginning to grow dim before the troubled vision of this later age. More and more their place was taken by a mob of idols and an obscure rabble of lesser devils. In this chaotic medley of Greek and barbarian demonology, the companies of unquiet souls and ghosts of the dead easily found a place. The ghost was no longer an alien when the gods themselves had become ghostly. When both gods and spirits have to answer to the spells of the sorcerer, the souls of the dead are seldom left in peace. We possess some relics of the art of spirit-raising in the Greco-Egyptian magic books, and we can now see with our eyes specimens which illustrate the practical outcome of this delusion in the magic charms and exorcisms that were scratched on tablets of lead or gold, and placed in the graves as the natural abode of the spirits, which were to be compelled where they have been found in considerable quantities in modern times. Among the sinister influences that are thus conjured to do the work of vengeance, punishment, or destruction upon the conjurer's enemy, the unquiet souls of the dead are also regularly mentioned. To them is attributed the power and the will to intervene with malevolence and obstruction in the life of men, no less than to the other spiritual, 535, powers of heaven and hell in company with whom they are summoned. Section 4. The cult of souls, for all its expansion, gave no assistance to the picturing of what might be the condition of the departed souls independently of their connection with the living. Those who troubled themselves about such matters and sought further information were obliged to have recourse, if not to the systems of theologians and philosophers, then to the imaginative accounts and pictures of ancient poetry and legend. The idea of a distant realm of the souls into which the strengthless shadows of those who had departed this life disappeared had not lost its hold on the popular imagination even of these later ages, difficult as it might be to reconcile such an idea with the presuppositions of cultus, with its customary worship and sustenance of the souls confined within the grave. The belief in a distant kingdom of the dead could not but continue to be current among men for whom the Homeric poems remain the earliest manual and schoolbook in the hands of youth, and the source of instruction and entertainment to every age. The passionate indignation with which philosophers of the Stoic, as well as the Epicurean faith, attacked the beliefs resting on the teaching of Homer cannot be explained, except by supposing that Homer and his picture had remained a guiding force with the masses who were uninstructed in philosophy. And, in fact, ancient writers use language which shows that the ancient conception of Hades was by no means discarded, but on the contrary was still vigorously alive among the populace. As to what might go on down below, and the general appearance of the underworld, these were questions that the invention of theological and semi-philosophically fancy, each according to its special lights and preconceptions, strove to answer in eager competition. But such attempts to picture the condition of things in the kingdom of the soul's attempts, which reached their highest point in the elaborate chiaroscuro of Virgil's, Hades remained the exercises of ingenious fancy and rarely pretended to be anything else. A distinct and authoritative popular system of belief on these points was scarcely possible when the orthodox religion of the state formally and dogmatically rejected everything of the kind. It would, indeed, have been more natural if, in connection with the idea of the congregation of souls enclosed in the 536 kingdom of the underworld deities, a belief in a compensatory justice to be found in this afterlife of the dead, had grown up and obtained popular currency. The oppressed and needy who feel themselves deprived of their share in this world's goods think only too easily that somewhere there must be a place where they too will someday enjoy the fruits that others alone are allowed to pluck upon earth, and place that somewhere beyond the boundaries of this world and of reality. Pious belief in the gods expects to obtain the prize, so often denied upon earth, in a realm of the spirit. If indeed such a conviction of a compensatory justice, to come reward of the virtuous and punishment of the wicked in a hereafter, was really more widely and seriously held in this age than it had been before, then the cult of the underworld deities, as it was practiced in the mysteries of the states, and the various religious societies, must have contributed in a large degree to bring this about. And contrariwise, the belief that the punishing and rewarding omnipotence of the gods would be felt in a hereafter must have brought an unbroken stream of adherents to those mysteries, which in fact offered their help and mediation in the life to come. Those only could imagine that they had detailed knowledge of the enigmas that lie beyond the reach of all experience, who could surrender themselves entirely to the dogmatic teaching of a closed sect. We may in fact take leave to doubt whether the gruesome pictures of a place of torment in Hades, with its undying punishment in devouring flames, and the similar fancies that later authors sometimes express, were in reality anything more than the private imaginations with which exclusive and superstitious conventicles sought to terrorize their members. The charming pictures of a land of arrival, to which death sends the much-tried children of men, may have been more widely accepted. Homer, the universal instructor, had stamped them upon men's memories. For the poet, the Elysian plain had been a place situated upon the surface of the earth, to which the occasional favor of the gods was able to translate a few of their dearest favorites, that they might there enjoy, without seeing death, unending bliss. In imitation of the Homeric fancy, the poetry of the following ages had imagined the translation of many other heroes and heroic women of the legendary, passed to a secret life of bliss in Elysium or in the islands of the blessed. Later fancy, which saw in Elysium the land of promise to which all men who had lived in a manner pleasing to the gods, 537, would be taken after their death, now placed its Elysium or islands of the blessed in the interior of the earth beyond the reach of all save disembodied souls. In later times, this became the currently accepted view, but the subject remained undefined and subject to variation. Men must still, in fact, have imagined the Isles of the Blessed, the abode of privileged spirits, to be situated upon the surface of the earth, though, indeed, far away beyond the limits of the discovered countries of the globe, when attempts could be made to find the way there and to bring back news to the living. The attempt attributed to Sertorius was only the most famous of such voyages of discovery. Why, indeed, should these magic isles remain forever undiscovered upon the borders of the inhabited world that yet offered so wide a field for discovery, when everybody knew of the island in the Black Sea, often visited by living men, where Achilles, the supreme example of miraculous translation, lived forever in perpetual enjoyment of his youth? For centuries, the island of Leucer, the separate Elysium of Achilles and a few select among the heroes, was visited and reverenced with religious awe. Here men thought they could discern in immediate perception, and in actual physical contact, something of the mysterious existence of blessed spirits. The belief in the possibility of miraculous translation to an eternity of unbroken union of body and soul, thus palpably and visibly substantiated, could not completely die even in this prosaic age. The educated did indeed find this conception so strange and unintelligible that when they come to speak of translation, legends of the past, they profess themselves unable to say what exactly the ancients had supposed to occur when such miracles took place. But the populace, which finds nothing easier to believe in than the impossible, once more naively accepted the miracle. Did not the examples of Amphiaraus and Trophonios plainly establish the fact of translation to underground retreats? And to them, as being still alive in their caves beneath the earth, a cult was offered until an advanced period. The translation of beautiful youths to everlasting life in the kingdom of the nymphs and spirits was the subject of many folk tales. Even in contemporary life, the miracle of translation seemed not altogether impossible. When the kings and queens of the Macedonian Empire of the East began to receive divine honors in imitation of the great Alexander himself, it was not long before men ventured to affirm that at the end of his earthly existence, the divine ruler everywhere, 538, does not die, but is merely carried away by the gods and still lives on. It is the peculiar property of divinity, as Plato clearly expresses it, to live forever in the indivisible unity of body and soul. A court-bred theology could the more easily make such demands upon the belief of subject peoples in the Semitic East, and possibly in Egypt too, because native legends had already told of the translation to immortal life of individual men dear to the gods and akin to the gods in nature. Just as similar stories became common in Italian legends too, though possibly only under the influence of Greek models. Indeed, quite apart from obsequious courtliness, Greeks and half-Greeks were quite capable of entertaining the idea that the darlings of their fancy, such as Alexander the Great, had not suffered death, but had been translated alive to the realm of imperishable physical existence. This is shown clearly enough by the success which attended the appearance, in Mosia at the beginning of the 3rd century AD, of another Alexander. This impostor traveled from land to land with a great train of bacchants, and everywhere men believed in his identity with the great monarch. A little earlier they had believed with equal credulity in the reappearance upon earth of the Emperor Nero, who, it was thought, had not died but had merely disappeared. When Antinous, the beautiful youth beloved by the Emperor Hadrian, sank and disappeared in his watery grave, he was at once regarded as a god who had in fact not died but had been translated. The miraculous translation of Apollonios of Tyana is reported with the utmost seriousness. Like the other marvels and mysteries in the strange and enigmatic existence of this prophetic figure, it found believers enough. But such unbroken continuance of the united life of body and soul, begun upon earth and carried on in a mysterious abode of bliss, the oldest form taken by the idea of human immortality in the Greek mind, was never attributed to more than a few specially favored and specially gifted individuals. An immortality of the human soul as such, by virtue of its nature and composition as the imperishable force of divinity in the mortal body never, became a real part of the belief of the Greek populace. When approximations to such a belief do occasionally find expression in popular modes of thought, it is because a fragment of theology or of the universally popular philosophy has penetrated to the lower strata of the uninstructed populace. Theology and philosophy remain the sole true repositories of the belief in the 539 immortality of the soul. In the meeting together and conjunction of Greek and foreign ideas in the Hellenized Orient, it was not Greek popular tradition, but solely the influence of Greek philosophy, that, finding favor even outside the limits of Greek nationality, communicated to foreign nations the arresting concept of the divine, imperishable vitality of the human soul upon the impressionable Jewish people. At least, it had the profoundest and most deeply penetrating influence. Section 5. All the various modes of conceiving the life enjoyed by the soul after the death of the body, as they had been explored, modified, and developed in the course of centuries, were admitted on an equal footing to the consciousness of the Greeks in this late period of their maturity. No formulated body of religious doctrine had by a process of exclusion and definition given the victory to any one conception at the expense of the others. But where so much was permitted, and so little proscribed, it is still possible to ask how these various formulations of belief, expectation, and hope stood in relation to each other. Were any more popular and more readily received than others? To answer this question, it is natural to suppose that we have only to turn to the numerous inscriptions from the gravestones of the people. Here, especially in these later times, individuals give unhampered expression to their own feelings and thus reveal the extent and character of popular belief. But information derived from this source must be carefully scrutinized if it is not to lead to misconception. If we pass in imagination through the long rows of streets in which the Greeks placed the memorials of their dead, and read the inscriptions on the tombstones, they now form part of the accumulated treasures of Greek epigraphy. The first thing that must arrest our attention is the complete silence maintained by the enormous majority of these inscriptions with regard to any hope, however formulated, or any expectation of a life of the soul after death. They content themselves with recording the name of the dead, adding only the name of the father, and in the case of a foreigner, the country of the deceased. At the most, the custom of some localities may add a farewell. Such stubborn silence cannot be satisfactorily explained simply on the grounds of an economy practiced by the surviving relatives, 540 of the deceased, though in some cases a municipal regulation against wordy inscriptions may have given countenance to such economies. The very silence of this people that was never at a loss for words to express its meaning, whether in verse or in prose, is in itself expressive. Where so little need was felt to give utterance to hopes of comfort, such hopes cannot have been of very vital consequence or matters of much assurance. Men rescued from forgetfulness only what had been the exclusive property of the individual, his name, the appellation which had distinguished him from all others in his lifetime, and has now become the barest and emptiest envelope of the once living personality. Inscriptions in which precise hopes of a future life are expressed form a very small proportion of the great mass of epitaphic records, and of these very few again are in prose. Not as simple records of plain and authentic fact do such provisions and announcements of a blessed and hoped-for futurity present themselves. They need the artistic pomp and circumstance with which poetic fancy and extravagant affection clothe their inspired voyagings beyond the region of cold and matter-of-fact reality. This is certainly significant. Even among the poetic epitaphs, the majority allude only to the life which the deceased has now done with, looking back upon the circumstances of his life, his fortunes and activities and character, giving expression, often with the most convincing sincerity, to the regret and dependence of the survivors, fixing attention exclusively upon things of this world. Wherever, at last, allusion is made to a future life, the tendency is rather to let fancy roam far beyond the limits of experience and sober reflection to a vague and visionary land of promise. Such lofty aspirations needed more than any others the elevated language of verse. But we should run the risk of falling into grave error if we concluded from the preponderance of such aspirations among the metrical epitaphs that these were the normal views of the city folk who were their contemporaries. The simple and archaic conception, which perpetuates the old Homeric attitude and views without a complaint or a regret the disappearance of the soul of the departed into Erebos, is of the rarest occurrence among these sepulchral verses. More commonly, we have the prayer that the departed may rest in peace, expressed in the traditional formula that really refers to the dead man lying in his grave, but also contains a further allusion to the soul that has departed to Hades. The idea is not yet dead, 541, that there is a realm of the souls which receives the departed Hades, the world ruled over by the underworld deities, the chamber of Persephone, the seat of primeval night. Here a state of semi-conscious existence is conceived to prevail, under the empire of forgetfulness, drinking of which the consciousness of the soul is darkened. Here the majority are assembled, and the dead man is visited by the reassuring thought that he may greet once more the souls of those who have gone before him. But sterner conceptions also occur. There is occasional reference to a judgment that separates the souls in the world below, dividing them into two and sometimes three classes in accordance with the deserts which they have earned on earth. There is no lingering over the pains of the damned, in the description of which the theological imagination had indulged so frequently. A more simple-minded fancy did not need such pharisaical satisfaction in the misfortunes of sinners in order to heighten its own assurance of superiority. There is no trace of a sentiment of penitence and terror indulged in for its own sake. The soul hopes to come by its rights, to reach the blessed, to arrive at the isles or the island of the blessed to Elysium, the abode of heroes and demigods. Such hopes are very commonly expressed, but as a rule only in a brief phrase of confidence and hope. we rarely meet with any elaborate or alluring picture of the abode of the blessed. That abode is generally placed within the limits of the underworld kingdom of the souls, and such anticipations, when particularized, refer commonly to a place of the good, which in various forms is represented as the hoped-for dwelling place of future life. But we also meet with the view that the company of the good is entirely removed from the region of underworld darkness. For many individuals, the hope is expressed, or the certainty announced that after death they will have their dwelling in the skyen, the shining ether, among the stars. This belief in the elevation of the disembodied soul to the regions above the earth is so frequently repeated in various forms in this late period that we must suppose that among those who entertained precise conceptions of the things of the next world, this was the most popular and widely held conviction. This belief that the soul rises to the neighborhood and even the community of the heavenly deities has its origin both in religious aspiration and in philosophy. Its roots, indeed, stretch back to a much 542 earlier period, and we may suppose that even in these later days it was derived from and very largely supported by the popular conception, disseminated by Stoic writers, of a living breath, which composes the human soul, and its effort upwards to the heavenly regions. But such language is in many cases plainly nothing more than a conventional formula which has already lost all vital significance. It rarely goes further than the expression of a hope that the soul will mount upwards to the heavenly heights. Very occasionally, in the adjective immortal applied to the soul, which only sleeps in death, we may detect the influence of mixed philosophical and theological ideas. We soon come to an end of the inscriptions, which give expression to the doctrines of theology and of theologically minded philosophy as to the divine nature of the soul, its brief pilgrimage through earthly life and destined return to its true home in a divine incorporeal existence. There is no certain mention of a belief in the transmigration of souls. Of the specifically Platonic doctrine or its influence there is scarcely a trace. Another type of belief derives its strength not from the teachings of philosophers, but from the usage and popular practice of religion. This is the belief of those who hope to be conducted after death to a blessed life by the special care of a god, presumably the god to which in their lifetime they have offered particular devotion. Such a god will lead them by the hand, they hope, and conduct them into the land of bliss and purity. One who has thus obtained a god as his leader may face the future with equanimity. Together with Hermes, the messenger of Persephonia, Persephone herself is most frequently mentioned among these conducting deities. Perhaps in this, we may see a reminiscence of the hopes awakened and cherished in the Eleusinian and other related mysteries hopes otherwise expressed on these tombstones with striking rarity. On the epitaph, certainly, a late composition of a hierophant of Eleusis who goes to the immortals. The dead man is made to commend, as a mystery revealed by the gods, the ancient opinion illustrated by stories like that of Cleobis and Biton, that death not only brings no evil to mortals, but is rather a blessing. A gloomy philosophy has in these latter days of the old religion and worship of the gods taken hold of the mysteries themselves, and given them an attitude of hostility to human life that was not originally theirs. We are reminded of the mysteries again when we find prayers, 543, or promises that the dead shall not drink of the water of forgetfulness in the realm of the souls, but shall be given the cold water to drink by the god of the lower world, that he shall be refreshed at the spring of Mnemosyne, the bath of immortality, and so preserve intact his memory and consciousness, the necessary conditions of full and blessed life. Here there appears to be a reference to the promises made by particular secret cults in which the departed has specially recommended himself to the powers of life and death. This must plainly be the case when, instead of the Greek Adonis, there is mention of Osiris, the Egyptian lord of souls. May Osiris give you the cold water is a common prayer expressed in a formula that is of frequent and significant occurrence in late epitaphs. Of the numerous secret cults of these later times that promised a blessed immortality to their adherents, there is but infrequent mention in the grave inscriptions. Occasionally, at the most, there is an allusion to the special favor, reaching even beyond the grave, which belongs to the initiated in the mysteries of Mithras. No doubtful promises, but real and practical experience forms the basis of the belief of those to whom the dead has appeared visibly in a dream to assure them that his soul has not been annihilated by death. The oldest proof of the continued existence of the soul remains in force the longest. The pupil hopes for something higher from the master whom death has taken away from his sight. He prays to him that, as he had once in life, so he will now continue to stand by his side, assisting him in the pursuance of his profession as a physician. Thou canst, for now thou hast a more divine part in life. Expectations of an energetic afterlife of the departed soul, expressing themselves in many forms, are widely current, but such expectations never achieve a unified, dogmatic form. Nor was anyone forbidden to cherish for himself and inscribe upon his gravestone unorthodox opinions of every kind, even though they should point to the very opposite of such expectations. A dubious, if precedes on many epitaphs the anticipation of a conscious life of the dead in full possession of the senses, or a reward of the dead in accordance with their deserts, if anything yet remains below. Such phrases are of very frequent occurrence. Indeed, the doubt itself is set aside when it is distinctly asserted that after death nothing of the man remains alive. All that men say of Hades and its terrors or its consolations is the fabled invention of poets. Darkness, 544, and nothingness is all that awaits us below. The dead turns to ashes or to earth. The elements out of which he was created take back what is their own. Life is only lent to man, and in death he restores the loan again. In death he pays tribute to nature. The bitter outcry of the survivors against death, the savage beast of prey, loveless and pitiless, that has snatched away their dearest from their side, shows small hope of the preservation of the vanished life. Grief and complaint, say others, are vain both for the dead and for the living. No man returns. The parting effected by death is forever. Only submission is left. Take comfort, child, no man is immortal, so runs the conventional phrase current among the populace and inscribed by many upon the graves of their vanished dead. Once I was not, then I was, and now I am no more. What more is there to be said? So speaks the dead from more than one gravestone, addressing the living who is soon to suffer the same fate. Live, he cries to the living, for there is nothing sweeter granted to us mortals than this life in the daylight. A last thought reverts once more to the life that has been left behind on earth. The body dies, personality vanishes, nothing is left alive on earth but the memory of the deeds and virtue of the departed. But there is a continuance in the life of others, more vital than in the empty sound of fame, achieved by him who leaves behind him on earth children and children's children. There are many who, in these later ages too, are content, in the true spirit of antiquity, with this blessing and desire no other consolation for their own annihilation. Section 6. But such reassertions of the antique temper were of rarer and rarer occurrence. The ancient world to which it had given such toughness and energy of purpose was on its deathbed. With the end of the 3rd and the beginning of the 4th century, it enters upon its last agony. A general failure of nerve had long threatened the loosely bound masses that shared in the Greco-Roman civilization. In the general atrophy that beset its old age, the vigorous blood of the genuine and unadulterated Greek and Roman stocks was flowing, but feebly. Now the universal process of decay sets in irresistibly. It was its own inherent weakness that made the attacks of outside forces so ominous to the old world. In the West, the old order vanished more swiftly and submitted more 545 completely to the new forces than in the Hellenized East. It was not that the old civilization was any less rotten in the East than in the West. The enfeebled hand and the failing mind betray themselves in every utterance in the last spasms of vital energy that inspired the art and literature of moribund Greece. The impoverishment of the vital forces out of which Greece had once brought forth the flower of its special and characteristic spirit makes itself felt in the altered relation of the individual to the whole, and of the totality of visible life to the shadowy powers of the unseen world. Individualism has had its day. No longer is the emancipation of the individual the object of man's endeavor. No longer is he required to arm himself against all that is not himself, that is outside the region of his free will and choice. He is not strong enough, and should not feel himself strong enough, to trust to the self-conscious strength of his own intelligence. Authority and authority that is the same for all must be his guide. Rationalism is dead. In the last years of the 2nd century, a religious reaction begins to assert itself and makes itself felt more and more in the period that follows. Philosophy itself becomes at last a religion, drawing its nourishment from surmise and revelation. The invisible world wins the day over the meager present, so grievously bound down by the limitation of mere experience. No longer does the soul await with courage and calmness whatever may be hidden behind the dark curtain of death. Life seemed to need something to complete it, and how faded and gray life had become a rejuvenation upon this earth seemed to be out of the question. All the more complete, in consequence, is the submission that throws itself with closed eyes and eager yearning upon another world, situated now far beyond the limits of the known or knowable world of the living. Hopes and a vague longing, a shrinking before the mysterious terrors of the unknown, fill the soul. Never in the history of the ancient world is the belief in an immortal life of the soul after death a matter of such burning and exacerbated ardor as in these last days when the antique civilization was preparing itself to breathe its last. Hopes of immortality, widely espoused by the masses and fed rather on faith than on reflection, sought satisfaction in the brilliant ceremonial of religions that easily outshone the simple worship of every day officially undertaken by the city. In these new rites, the worshippers united in the secret cult seemed to be placed more directly in the hands of the gods. And above all, a blessed existence hereafter was assured to pious 546 believers. In these days, the ancient and hallowed mysteries of Eleusis awake to a new life and remain in vigorous activity till nearly the end of the 4th century. Orphic conventicles must have attracted worshippers for ages. The Hellenized Orient was familiar with many such orgiastic cults. In the mixed populations of the East, the new religions proved more attractive to the Greeks, too, than their old worship of the gods of Greece. Clear and definite obligations, fixed commandments and dogmas, holding the weak and frail individual in their stronger embrace, seemed to belong more peculiarly to these foreign worships than to the old beliefs of Greece. Rigid and unalterable maintenance of primitive ideas and practices seemed to give the former the stamp of sacred and certain knowledge. From all men, they demanded perfect submission to the god and his priests, perfect renunciation of the world, conceived as dualistically opposed to the divine, the purging away of the contamination of its lusts by purifications and sanctifications, ceremonial expiations and asceticisms. By these means, the faithful prepared themselves for the highest reward that piety could conceive, an unending life of bliss far away from this unclean world in the realm of the holy and the consecrated. To the belief in a blessed immortality, these foreign mysteries contributed their much-desired support, and the populace welcomed their message of salvation with all the greater eagerness, since their varied and impressive ceremonial contrasted so strikingly with the plain and homely worship of the Greek gods. In the symbolism of these exotic cults, men seemed to discern a mysterious and secret knowledge, and to the divine figures illuminated by such a halo were easily attributed strange and magical powers beyond belief or experience. The cult of the Egyptian deities had long been familiar both in the East and in the West, and they maintained and extended their influence down to the last days of the ancient religions. The Phrygian deities, the Thraco-Phrygian cults of Sabazios, Attis, and Cybele, and the Persian worship of Mithras were later comers, but they, too, took equally firm root and spread over the whole extent of the empire. The higher culture of these last centuries, having become credulous and avid of marvels, no longer looked with contempt upon the means of salvation and sanctification, which had once been left almost entirely to the lower orders of the population. The most cultivated and educated people of these times used their culture and their education simply to justify everything mysterious and incomprehensible in itself even, 547, when it was expressed in the most physical symbolism. The newly awakened religious interest of the populace had coincided with a return on the part of philosophy to the teaching of Plato, a teaching which itself tended towards religion. Platonism had invaded the doctrine of other schools at many points, and it had already acquired a new home for itself in the restored academy, where once an unplatonic skepticism had overthrown the teaching of the master. Now, a new Platonism comes forward and overwhelms all the other schools of philosophy. Absorbing the doctrines of Aristotle and Chrysippus, which it fancied it could reconcile with Platonism, it weaved them into its own special teaching so that the whole presented a subtle and far-reaching system of thought. The speculative system of Neoplatonism, into which the old age of Greece, in spite of its weariness, contrived to introduce so much profundity, spirit, and ingenuity, together with a luxuriant mass of scholastic folly, fills the history of the last centuries of Greek thought. Its fundamental tendency is, once more, a turning away from the life of nature and a determined invasion of a transcendent world of pure spirit. And it was by this tendency that it satisfied the needs of its time. The soul and first cause, lying beyond all being and continually expressing itself in creative emanations, yet never troubled or impaired in its perfect and eternal transcendency. The development, in an unbroken process from this one, of the world of thinking, of the ideas and pure thought preserved in it the world of spirit, and the world of matter until, at last, in longing and desire, all things created return to the origin of all being. To describe and express all this is the single theme, persisting throughout all variations, of this philosophy. The whole fabric of reality, the interplay of cause and effect, depends upon the inherence of the thing caused in its cause from which it takes its origin and to which it returns at last. That which in the evolution of nature takes its origin from the one and degenerates more and more completely, in the darkness and corruption of matter, as it gets further away from its source now becomes man and seeks immorality and religion a conscious return to the pure and everlasting and unfailing one. The divine does not descend to earth, and man must reach upwards to the divine heights in order to unite himself with the one that is before all multiplicity. This union can be brought about by the pure exercise of the human reason, but also in the mysterious harmony of the individual life, with the first cause that is beyond all reason in the ecstasy, 548, that is above all rationality. It can be achieved when at last the whole series of rebirths has been passed through, whereupon the pure soul, the divine in man, enters into the divinity of the whole. To fly from the world not to work within the world to produce something better is the teaching and injunction of this last Greek philosophy. Away from separate, divided being, upward towards the uninterrupted glory of the one divine life, the soul wings its way. The world, this visible world of matter, is fair, says Platinos, for it is the work and image of the divine, present and working in it. A last gleam of the departing sunlight of Greek sensibility seems to break through the words in which Platinos rejects the Christian Gnostic hatred of the world. The ugly, he says, is strange and contrary to God as well as to nature. But the soul must no longer rest in the world of created beauty. The soul is so profoundly conscious of its derivation from the supersensual, of its divinity and eternity, that it must rise above all created being and reach out to the one that was before the world and remains forever outside the world. This philosophy, profoundly estranged though it was from the old Greek attitude to life with its enjoyment of the world, nevertheless felt itself called upon to oppose the rising tide of the new and irresistible religion. It took under its protection the ancient Greek culture and the ancient faith that was so inseparably bound up with that culture. Its most convinced supporters, with the last of the emperors of the old faith at their head, threw themselves wholeheartedly into the fray. And before them rode the genius of ancient Hellas and the old beliefs of Greece. But when the battle had been fought and lost, it became apparent to all the world that it was a corpse that rode before the exalted combatants, like the body of the dead Cid Campeador fastened upon his horse and leading his hosts against the Moors. The ancient religion of Greece, and with it the whole civilized life of the Greek world, faded and died at that discovery, and could not be recalled to life. A newer faith, very differently endowed, and having power to crush the heavily laden soul and point it upwards in absolute submission to the divine compassion, held the field. The new world that was coming into being had need of it. And yet was Greece quite extinguished and dead forever? Much only too much of the philosophy of its old age lived on in the speculative system of the Christian faith. And in the whole of modern culture, so far as it has built itself upon, 549, Christianity, or by extension from it, in all modern science and art, not a little survives of Greek genius and Greek inspiration. The outward embodiment of Hellas is gone. Its spirit is imperishable. Nothing that has once been alive in the spiritual life of man can ever perish entirely. It has achieved a new form of existence in the consciousness of mankind and immortality of its own. Not always in equal measure, nor always in the same place, does the stream of Greek thought rise to the surface in the life of mankind. But it is a river that never quite runs dry. It vanishes to reappear. It buries itself to emerge again. Desinunt ista, non perunt. Notes to Chapter 14. Part 2. Appendix I. In many legends, death by lightning makes the victim holy and raises him to godlike, everlasting life. We need only remember the story of Semele, who now zo/in Olympi/ois apothenoi equals sabro mo keranu equals pi o Roman 2:27, or that of Heracles and his vanishing from the pyre of wood lighted by Zeus, flash of lightning, see Pardic. DS4 38:45, or the parallel accounts of the translation or death by lightning of Erechtheus, above, chapter Roman 3n, 39. The primitive, popular belief finds unusually clear expression in the words of Charax App. Anon, de Incard, Roman 16 p. 325 5 ff. West. Who says of Semele, Keranu equals kataskare/santos, erfani/s there. Eke/nairnme \nu equals n, hoppy equals a epi \toy equals as diabler/toys la/gedai. Theas moi ras lashe equals no circumflex e circumflex/therson. In this account, Semele is immediately raised to heaven by the flash of lightning, a version of the story frequently given by later authors. Zu /snseam/larynectere equals sgare equals s-eyes tueno/lumpon comi/sidia /puro/s aristid. 1 p. 47 dind. Cf. Philoster, Imag. I-14, non-nus d Roman 8, 409 ff. The passage of Pindar quoted above would also admit of a similar interpretation. Generally speaking, ho karanathe /s hos theo /s tima equals tai artem, 2 9 p 94 26, as 1 hupo /dio /s tetamerum /nos, ib. 93 24. The belief in such elevation of a mortal through the disruption and purification of his body by the sacred fire of lightning, Apu equals R Katha/Arsion of the highest kind, see chapter I, N41, need not be of late origin simply because it so happens that only late authorities speak of it in unmistakable terms, as Wilamowitz thinks, Ind, Skal. Gotting. Hib. 1895 pp. 1213. Such lofty conceptions were by this time no longer the product of popular imagination. Besides, it is quite clearly referred to in the above-mentioned story of Semele, see Esp. DS5, 52, 2, and in those of Heracles Erechtheus Asclepios. In the same way lightning struck the tomb of Lycurgos, as afterwards that of Euripides, as Theophile/Statos kai /Hosio/Tatos plu. Lick. 31. When the statues of the Olympic victor Euthymos at Locri and Olympia are struck by lightning, it shows that he has become a hero. Pliny, Nh., Roman 7 152. The body of the person struck by lightning remains uncorruptible. Dogs and birds of prey dare not touch it. Plu, SMP. 423 p. 665b. It must be buried in the place where the lightning struck it, Artem. p. 95 6, cf. Fest. p. 178b, 21 ff. Plin, Nh., Roman 2 145. Every detail shows plainly that the Dio/Blerdos was regarded as holy. This, however, does not prevent death by lightning from being regarded on other occasions as the punishment of crime, as in the cases of Salmoneus, Capanius, etc., though in some even of these cases the idea is occasionally present that the lightning's victim is raised to a higher existence. This is distinctly so when Euripides in Supple makes a character called Capanius, who has been killed by lightning, a hiero /s necro/s 935, and his 2/m boss, Rogus, hiero/s2 981. Hiero/s never means 582, accursed like the Lat. Caesar, it is invariably a title of honor. Capanius is here called holy, just as Astacides, on his translation to everlasting life, is hiero/s in Callimachos, and as Hesiod speaks of the hiero /ng/nos athana/ton, with 2/m boss hiero/scf. S. Oc. 1545, 1763. We must not fail to observe that in this passage, where a friend of Cap is supposed to be speaking, the latter is certainly not regarded by Europe as an impious person, as he is generally in tragedy, and by Europe, himself in phone and even in supple. The enemy so regards him, 496 ff. Though ac. To this speaker Amphiaraus too is snatched away in atonement for his crime. Euripides in fact makes him highly praised by Adrastos, 861 ff. as the very opposite of a hubrister/s, and it is obvious that Euadna's sacrifice of her life, which immediately follows, is not intended to be offered for the benefit of a criminal and enemy of the gods. For these reasons Euripides ennobles the character of Capaneus, and consequently, the death of the hero by lightning can no longer stand for his punishment, but is on the contrary a distinction. He becomes a hiero/s necro/s. This, however, could not have been done by Europe, unless the view that such a death might in certain circumstances bring honor on the victim and elevate him to a higher plane of being had been at that time widespread and generally recognized. Europe, therefore, provides the most distinct evidence for the existence of such a belief in his time. As one of the exalted dead Capaneus is to be separated from the rest of the dead and burnt par, oi/cus 2/SDE, 935, 936, 1009 before the Ana/Katoron of the goddesses at Eleusis, 88, 290. Finally, Asclepios, in all the stories that are told of his death by lightning and already in his Fr. 109 RZ, is never regarded as entirely removed from this life. He lives on as hero or god for all time, dispensing blessings. Zeus allows him to live on forever immortal. Luke, dd. 13 and ac. To later versions of the story in the constellation Ophiuchus, Eratos, Cadaste. 6. Hygiene, Astron Roman 2, 14, the real and primitive conception evidently being that he was transported to everlasting life by Zeus' lightning flash. So Min fell. 22:7 says quite rightly, Esculapius ut indium surget fulminator. Appendix Roman 2. Mashalismo/s. Imishali/s there is the word used by Ish, Cho, 439 of the murdered Agamemnon. Soph L. 445 says Huff, hair equals S, Cludamner/straws, Thano /Enna/Timos ho/Sti Dusmaner /S Imishali/S there also of Agamemnon. What particular abomination was meant by this brief statement must have been immediately understood by the Athenian public of the day. A more detailed account is given by Fote and Swade. Mashali/Smata cf. Hesich, SV, Apostle, PR, Xi 4, and they give Aristophanes of Byzantium as their authority. Not from Aristophanes, for they differ in many particulars, but from a closely related source come the two versions, 583 of the Scholion to Soph, L, 446 and M. 118, 22f. According to their authority, Mashalismo/s is something done by the murderer, hoi phonu/sans ex epibulaire equals s Aristoph, to the corpse of the murdered man. He cuts off the extremities of his victim, strings the severed parts on a chain, and puts them on whom? On himself, or the murdered man? Aristophanes' words are undecisive. The skull. Soph L. 445 speaks in the first version of himself, Hudo equals s p 123 17 papeg, and in the second of him, i.e. the murdered man, Peri /ter /and masha/laren auto equals ecker/mazanata/ p 123 23 cf 124 5. This too is probably the meaning of skull. App. Rh. Roman 4 477 m. 118 28 9 speaks distinctly of hanging the chain round the neck of the dead man. This is, in fact, the most probable version. The murderer hung the limbs, strung together on a rope, round the neck of his victim and then drew the rope under the armpits, masha/lie, a proceeding which is far from being impossible, as has been said, as anyone may discover by trying it for himself. The murderer then crossed the ends of the rope over the breast of his victim, and after drawing them under the armpits, fastened them behind his back. From this process of drawing under the armpits, the whole procedure is called mashalismo/s, and the mo-ria of the dead man thus fastened to his body are his mashali/smata, Aristoph. Anyone who wishes to reject this description of mashalismo/s, as some have done recently, must first of all show from what source Aristophanes of Byzantium, whom, no one who knows him would accuse of improvising such details or of concealing his ignorance by invention can have got his information, if not from actual report and historical tradition. The possibility that he arrived at it by straining the meaning and giving a private interpretation of his own to the words mashali/sign and mashalismo/s is excluded by the nature of these words. They offer no hint whatever in the direction of the special meaning suggested by his account. We cannot indeed say, as Wilamowitz does on A. Cho. 439, that grammar forbids us to accept the explanation of what happened in mashali/sign given by Aristoph. To say, imashali/s there, he had to suffer mashali/sign, mashalismo/s, is equally correct whatever sense we give to the process of mashalismo/s. But the word itself does not testify, by its mere form, to the absolute or exclusive correctness of Aristophanes' interpretation. It denotes without distinction absolutely any proceeding in which the masha/lie figure at all. Verbs in Eisen derived from the names of parts of the body can denote according to the circumstances the utmost variety of actions done to or with the part of the body concerned. Cf. Kefali/sign, Okeni/sign, Trackerly/sign, Lamy/sign, Omi/sign, Rachai/sign, Cherry/sign, Dakshali/sign, Gastry/sign, Skelly/sign, and even Pugi/sign. What particular sort of activity applied to the masha/lie is indicated by the verb mashali/sign cannot be decided from the mere form of the verb. This only makes it the more necessary to adhere to Aristophanes' interpretation, which must have been derived from some other source, i.e. from actual knowledge. It may be true that mashali/sign, considered simply from 584, the point of view of its form, might conceivably mean to tear the arm from the shoulder at the armpits, as Bendorf suggests. Monument von Adam Clissi, p. 132a, though such an ekmachlu/ein to \n brachii/ ona ek ter equals s masha/lers should rather be a pomashali/sign or ekmashali/sign. But that out of its many possible meanings, the verb should have just this particular one is not suggested by anything, least of all by the sculptured relief on which the gods appear to be tearing out the right arms of their defeated enemies. Such scenes, according to Bendorf, represent mashalismo/s. But can the Greeks really have attributed to the gods this much execrated practice of cowardly murderers? We are not told by anyone that this scene represents mashalismo/s. That is only a conclusion drawn from an apparent agreement between the representation and the view, itself, as yet unproved, of what happened in mashali/sign. Is the correctness of the meaning assigned to the word to be proved in its turn from its agreement with the representation? A most palpable argument in a circle. There is no valid reason for rejecting the statement of Aristophanes, and there must be very good reason indeed for so doing before we may discredit such an authority. He gives his information with no uncertain voice and no suggestion of hesitation, and it must be regarded as the simple account of well-established facts. It would receive additional confirmation if it needed any from the very meaning and conception of the word masha/lisma. Mashali/smata must be the product of mashalismo/s. They are, in fact, the severed moria of the murdered man, with which 2 Aristophanes identifies them. Sophoclere equals sn *** tri/low player/rare mashalisma/tani/rare to \n mashalismo/n, probably a mere oversight for twen tra/chairlon. Swade, as v imashali/s there, soph, fr. 566 equals 623p. If mashali/sign had consisted in the dislocation of the arm from its socket, it would be impossible to say what such mashali/smata might be. They are without doubt identical with what are otherwise called, in descriptions of mutilations of the corpse of a murdered man, a pas/argimata, Jason after the murder of Epsiatos, a pas/argimata to/nithano/entos, a. R. Roman 4, 477, cf. Skull, and m. 118, 22 ff. Acriteria/smata, to/mia, ta \apotmer/mata chi \acriteria/smata 2 equals necru equals hessich. These expressions allow us to conclude that the whole procedure is intended to offer the murdered man as a sacrifice to some sort of apotro/pei. The mashali/smata are the aparchai/ of this sacrificial victim. Indeed, Aristoph, of Byzantium, App. Phot. Mashali/Smata definitely states that Mashali/Smata was the name given to ta/toy equals s Mary equals s epitith/mina, apo /to equals and omo equals n, not o circumflex/mon as the ed. Give, as also knock arist, buys, p. 221, cre/anti equals s-to equals n-theo equals n-thuc/eyes. This refers, though it does not seem to have been remarked by those who have hitherto dealt with the passage to the parts of the body which were cut off from the raw flesh of the hierarchy, equals on before the sacrifice, laid on the severed marrow/ of the victim, and burnt up completely with these. The amethede equals n in fact so often mentioned in Homer, a 460I, b 423f, g 456ff, m 360f, x 427f. If these amethedu/mina could also be called, in 585, a comparison, mashali/smata, that again shows that at the mashalismo/s there was no tearing out of an arm from its socket, but that in reality the extremities of the murdered man, acriteria/sansmo/ria2/2, were hewn off and a piece cut off ek panto /esme/ruse 2 equals so/mottos, as the grammarians following Aristophanes say. Only in this case is the proceeding like that which took place at the amethede equals n when the sacrificers e/copsin micro /n apo /panto /s me/lose aristonic. In Skal. A 461, Apollon, Lex Home, 171-8, Lex, Ret, App, Used. A 461, p. 134-36, Ahmad/Terson, to /aph, heka/stumi/lose 2 equals hire/u apit/monto chi /apare/arzanto app, amu equals, so the last word should be written here too, though usteth. Found end was surprised o circumflex/mu chi /in/ballon eyes ta /mary/ a kata /enthusia/n. So too it is said of Umios. Ho di amethede equals to subo/ters, pa/enton arxa/minos meal/on, x 427f. This is the passage in which haramer/nous, tsd to /amethede equals n. Skal, Biela 461. It is this passage and not a 461 which is meant by Hesich. 2 is v. Amethede equals n when he says exerge equals ti d, auto /s ho/marrows, cf. Also Dion, Hal 7, 72-15. Mashalismo/s was then essentially an offering intended to avert evil, or, what comes to the same thing, a cathartic offering, i.e. a symbol indicating such an offering. It was consummated by murderers epi /ti equals s katha/arsesin, sl, 445. Hup /r2 equals n mer equals nin ekli/nin as Aristoph. Buys says p 221n to /e/argon aphosius/men, as we are told by Apostolius Prov. Xi 4. All these mean the same thing, but besides these there may still have been another intention present in the minds of the superstitious. The mutilation of the murdered man took place according to sl. 445, in the second version. There is something similar even in the first, p 123, 18f, Haina, Fasci/n, Esthener /sg/noido pro /s to /entitai/sasti to n phone, the mutilation of the corpse was transferred to the sucher/ that was leaving the body. Such is the ancient conception to which Homer too is not a stranger, cf. e.g. L40ff. If the dead man is mutilated he will not, for example, be able to hold or throw the spear which in Athens was borne before the murdered man at his funeral, if he left no kinsman as avenger behind him, and was then set up beside his grave, 47-69, Ur, Tro. 1147f, Pol, Roman 865, Ister App, M, 354-33ff. Ob. 237, 30f. Certainly for no other purpose than that of supplying the dead man himself with a weapon with which to take vengeance on his own account, since no one else would Byrthe equals him. Thus among the Tasmanians, a spear was planted on the grave of the dead that he might have a weapon ready for fighting. Quatrophages, Homs fossils et Homs sovages, p. 346. Probably the Greek murderer when he amasha/lysin, calculated in exactly the same fashion as the Australian Negro who cuts off the thumb from the right hand of his fallen foe in order that his soul may no longer be able to hold a spear, Spencer, Prink, of Social. I, p. 212. In Soph. L. 446, the murderer after the machilismo/s also wipes the bloody instrument of death on the head of the murdered man. Murderers did this ho/spur apotropios/men to \musos to \ento equals fo/no, 586. Skal. There are passages in the Odyssey which allude to the custom, mi ga e/argon, ho \ser equals kephalair equals anama/says, T92, as well as in Herodotus and Demosthenes, see Schneidwin on Electra. Their meaning is quite correctly given in Just. On odd. T92, hos eyes kephalair \n dare equals then eke/noise, toy equals s pephonium/noise, trepum/nu 2 equals kaku equals. Evidently a mimic version of eyes kephalair \n soy/. Something similar is intended when the murderer sucks the blood of the murdered man 3 times and spits it out again 3 times. App. RH describes such a scene Roman 4, 477f, and something similar occurred in Ish. Fr. 354, M, refers to this in immediate connection with machilismo/s. Here too the object is the cause/tharsis of the murderer, the expiation of the impious deed. Hair \the mies auth/enter c delictasias heil/estai, ar, apoptu/side equals chi \cather/rastai sto/ma, a. Spitting 3 times is a regular feature in magic charms and counter-charms. In this case, the blood of the murdered man, and with it the power of vengeance that rises up out of the blood, is averted. Dispuimus commercials morbos, hoc est, contagia regeramus plin, nh. 28:35. What savage tribe ever had more primitive ideas or a more realistic symbolism than the Greek populace and, perhaps not populace only of classical times, in the sinister backwaters of their life, into which we have here for a moment descended? Appendix Roman III. Amu/Erbai, a/gam, and Danaids in the underworld. In Polygnoto's picture of the underworld were to be seen the figures to equals no memearm/on, to equals enta \dro/mina, elusi equals ni enaudino \estheme/nonlo/go, an old man, a pi equals s, a young and an old woman, who bear water to apply those in broken pitchers. Paus. 10:31-9-11. The myth is evidently founded upon an etymological play on words those who have neglected the completion of the holy T/layer, and are 8 lay equals s hiero equals n h sir. 482 must perform the vain labor in the realm of Persephone of carrying water in broken vessels. The Danae/Don Hudria's 8 lay equals s axioc. 371e. It can only have been an oversight that made Pausanias forget to say that the pythos is tetrarm/nos, for this is essential to the story CPL, Gore, 493 BC, Phalter, App, Ath, 633f 18-2 p. 235k, Zenob, Prov, Roman 2-6, etc., and certainly cannot, as Diatorich Nicaea 70 imagined, be replaced by the Ketego/Tao/Straka. That the O memearm/noi, the Amu/Erbai, as the inscription on the picture called them Paus. Section 9, were in fact those who had neglected the Eleusinian mysteries, is only a conclusion of Pausanias, or of his authority, as we see from the way he speaks in Section 11, but it is probably the right conclusion. The Orphics took over the Eleusinian fable, but exaggerated it to the point of absurdity. They too \s anosi/us kai \addy/kus koski /no who/dor anaka /zausifi /rain in Hades, pl. rp. 363d. Gore. 493 BC. In this they followed a hint given by a popular proverb representing one of the do/nadakoski/no who/dor fi/rain, which is also Roman. Cf. Plaut, 587 Sud. 102, as an ordeal. Plin, nh. 28:12. It is not until later, nor in surviving literature before the Axiachus, 371e, though perhaps a little earlier on vase paintings from South Italy, that the story occurs in which it is the daughters of Danaus who are punished in Hades by having to fill the leaking vessel. The reason given for this punishment is their murder of the sons of Aegyptos in the marriage bed. But why did the punishment take this particular form? Clearly, in the case of the Danaids, their non-fulfillment of an important T/loss is requited in the ever 8 equals S hudre equals AI. Their marriage union was uncompleted through their own choice. Thus marriage itself was often called a T/loss, and the wedding was preceded by prot/Leia, and compared with the T/layer of the mysteries. In this it is certainly implied that their deed had not been expiated, and they themselves had not found other husbands, but had as it were immediately after their impious deed been sent down to Hades cf. Yor, Hec, 886 p. 436, 14 Dind. The daughters of Danaus came to the underworld as a /gamma. To die before marriage was regarded as the height of ill luck by the common people, cf. Welker Sil, Ep. p. 49, the essential reason being that those who die thus leave behind them nobody who is called upon to keep up the cult of their souls, etro. 380. Other ideas may have been vaguely combined with this. Thus, on the graves of a /gam, a lautrafo/rose was set up a figure of a pi equals S, or a co/rare lautrafo/rose, or a vessel called the lautrafo/rose, which has been identified with certain bottomless vases. See Furtwängler Sammel. Sabaroff on PL, LV Ilix, cf. Wolters Ath. Myth. Roman 16, 378 ff. Can this have referred to a similar fate awaiting the /gam after their death, a fate such as was imputed to the Danaids in particular as mythical types of those who are a /gamma by their own fault, and ever unsuccessful carrying of water for the lautro/n of the bridal bath? Diodorich, Nicaea, 76, with some probability takes this as the reason for the water carrying. Of these two myths was the one which appears later in order of time the story of the Danaids merely, a subsequent development out of the earlier one, even said to occur on a black-figured vase, which told of the vain water-carrying of the Amu/Erda. I cannot be so sure of this as I once was. I cannot indeed admit, with Dummler, Delphica, 18 ff. Who, however, fails to prove an earlier date for the story of the Danaids jar, that it would be difficult to imagine how a special class of human beings came to be replaced later on by certain mythical representatives, such as the Danaids were. But it is a very suspicious fact that the Danaids do not, as a matter of fact, represent the particular class of mankind the Amu/Erda whose place they are supposed to have taken as their mythological representatives. They are not Amu/Eroi at all, but a /gamma. The a/gamma and their 8 equals S hudre equals AI in Hades must have been familiar in popular belief. In addition to this, the mystical fable of the similar behavior of those who had neglected the T/loss of initiation may have sprung up, but certainly not as the model of the /gamma story, more probably as a subsequent, 588, rehandling of it for the purposes of mystical edification. The story of the /gam has a much more primitive and popular flavor, and it alone gives a definite relation between the special labor of water carrying in Hades and the nature of their default on earth. The mythical fate of the /gam was then forgotten owing to the competing interest of the story of the *Amu/Erbai, which, in fact, absorbed it. When a poet for a poet, it must have been took up what still surviving custom and its accompanying legend applied to the AG in general, and transferred it to the Danaids. This version of the myth was then victorious in the general consciousness, both over the popular tradition about the /gam and the mystery fable of the *Amu/Erbai. It remains to be said that the Danaids, and the *Amu/Erdoi too in a lesser degree, were supposed to be punished by their 8 equals S hudre equals AI, this, so long as it was a matter of the /gamma simply. Cannot have been the meaning of that fate of purposeless toil in their case any more than it was in the case of Ochnos. Even Xenophon, Oak, Roman 7:40, lets us see that the vain toilers are not as a matter of fact intended to inspire horror, as sinners, but rather pity. His words are, ouch hora equals S, hoi eyes to \n tetrarum /non-pi/thon antle equals and lego/men, hos oikti/ront, hotima /tern pona equals n daku equals c. Nair \d/ e/fair hair gunner / kai \gar tilair /moan /s isen, I2 equals to /g poyu equals sin. This gives us the attitude of mind from which the whole story originally grew up. Appendix Roman IV. The tetralogies of Antiphon. I ought not to have admitted the doubt suggested in Chapter V, N 176, as to the genuineness of the tetralogies traditionally ascribed to Antiphon. I have examined more carefully the well-known linguistic variations between the tetralogies and speeches I, V, and Roman VI of Antiphon, and also the recently noticed divergences. See Dittenberger, Hermes, 31. 32 of the tetralogies from Athenian law, for which the author, like the declamation writers of later times, substitutes occasionally a ius scholasticum, a purely fanciful creation, but one more suited to pleading in utranc partem. All these objections seem to me, on maturer consideration, insufficient to make us reject the identity otherwise so well established of the author of the tetralogies with the author of the speeches. Appendix V. Ritual purification effected by running water, rubbing with animal or vegetable substances, ski/law, figs, absorption of the materia peccans into eggs. For the purpose of ritual purification, it is necessary to have water drawn from running springs or streams, or from the sea. Tha/lasaclu/zapa/nta tanthro/pon kaka, your, it, 1193. Hence in the exalted, 589, semi-oracular language of bardic poetry her ami/antos equals tha/lassa, ish, p. 578. At a sacrifice ho hieru /esapore/netithalis/ssa, sacrificial calendar from Kos, Insker, Kos, 38:23. Various details on this point in Lomier, de Lustrat. C. 17. In the water thus drawn from running sources the power of washing off and carrying away the evil still seem to be inherent. When the pollution is unusually severe, it has to be purged by the water from several running springs. Crerna/on-a-po/p/nt empt. 452 m equals 143 d. A-po/crerno equals n trio equals n menand. Days. 530, 22k. Orestes c. apud tria flumina circum Hebron x response purificavit, from the stain of matricide, Lamprid, Heliog. Romans 7, 7 or else at region in the 7 streams which combine to form one river, Varro ap. Prob adverg, p3 4 kale, Shthiok, prol, p1 3 ff, dub, and cf. Herman opusk, Roman 2 71 ff. Even water from 14 different springs might be used at a purification of murder, Swade, 476 BC Gaius. A-po/d/s heptacuma/ton, conclusion of an iambic or trochaic line. In all this, the remarkable persistence of Greek ritual performances is shown once more. Even in a late period, the same cathartic rules prevail. An order of the Clarion Oracle of about the 3rd century AD. App. Buresh, Claros, p9, commands those who seek its aid a-po/naya/don heptamatu/ cathero/ and po tun and 2/nestai. Ho/and theo equals cypro/sothen, taken from ill. PS 533, but understood in a temporal sense. Ekrer equals nkai/episum/nos afu/sastai rare equals ni/t/do/mus ktl. And in a magical papyrus, about 4th century, App Parthi Ab Burl. Ac. 1865, p. 126, L 234-5, instructions are given to collect who/door pergai equals on a-po/z, pergo equals n for magic purposes. Then again in medieval superstition, for the purposes of hydromantia, water must be taken from 3 running streams, a little from each, etc. Hartlib App. Grimm, p. 1770, probably a survival from classical antiquity. Cf. Plin, nh. 2846 e tribus pudes, etc. cf. Also and in general the completely analogous use of water in old Indian ceremonies of purification, Oldenburg rel. Veda 423 ff. 489, parama/tetane apoma/tetane, wiping off of the uncleanness. See Wittenb, Adplu more Roman 6 pp. 1006-7. In this use paripsare equals n also occurs. In a transferred sense, a pharmaco/s is called a peri/serma equals perica/tharma, ep. Adcor. 1 4 13. Washing off with bran, earth, etc. is often mentioned. Otherwise, the ski/law is used or the bodies of sacrificed dogs. Eka/thera/t/mikai/ape/max kai/perrier/nies/ois with perrier/gn. Chi /ski/lair Luke, Nesium. 7. The superstitious man is accustomed hierias kale /sas ski / lair e circumflex /sku /laki kelu equals psyhoto / and paracatha equals ri thphr. Ch. 28:16 fin. All sorts of medicinal properties were attributed to the ski/law. The idea is elaborated farcically in the pamphlet of Pythagoras, Peri /ski/lairs d.l. Roman 8:47 care/lairs cobbit, an extract of which is given by Galen P. Upori/Saint 3, volume Roman 14, *** 576-9k, but above all it is regarded as katha/arceos. Artem. Roman 3:50, kathartikare /pas/sers kaki as shthiok, v 121 and cf. Kraton, che/r. 232k. Hence it is also a lexifa/aramakan, ho/lair pro /to equals and thero equals and cremame/nair diosk. Roman 2:202 fin. See Hermes 51:628. Such also was the teaching of Pythagoras. Plin, nh. 20:101, or it may be buried at the threshold. R. Danui/d. Fr. 8. 590. It is also loose/con /tharticare/ Artem, Roman 3:50 cf. GP. 15:16 with notes of Nicholas. As being able to keep off daimons in wolf form, it was then used in religious purification. Figs are also used for the purpose of religious cleansing and scouring, black figs particularly in Ferrum Diorum et Avertentium in tutela sunt Macer. 3:20-23. Figs used en catharmoi equals s. Eustath, odd, p. 1572-57. Is this the meaning of the parama/tetane of the eyes with figs in Ferricer? App. Ath. 3:78d. Hence zu /asuka/ceos equals katha/arceos, Eustath. Figs the best alexifa/aramakan, Arist. App Jul, Ep. 24 p. 505-7 ff. From the specially magic properties of the fig comes the idea that fig trees are never struck by lightning. Plu, SMP. 59 p. 684c, GP. 11:2-7 Theoph. Non. 260-288 and cf. RH. Muse. 50-584. Lid, Mens, Fr. Fowls. 1 p. 181 w4 4 p. 69 w. The Pharmacoethethargelia, above, chapter Roman 9n. 26 where strings of figs round their necks helid app. Fote, Bibble, p. 534a 5 ff. And are beaten with branches of the fig tree cross/die and with ski/lie hippin. FRR. 4-5-8h. Crati/e circumflex no mos. Here again the figs have a cathartic purpose. Muller mistakes this, Dorian's, I. 346, as is shown also by the presence of ski/lie as well, cf. In general Theoc. Roman 7:107, v. 121. Before the pharmacoi were driven out of the city as scapegoats, they were thus purified with the above-mentioned cross/die and ski/lie. The same thing is said in the story of the ravens, which parodies this expiatory rite. The ravens are offered up to Loimo/s as a sort of pharmacoi/paracati/rontas epodai equals esophi/nizo equals entas, chi /epil/jane toe equals Loimo, few equals g, ease co/rakas arist. Fr. 454. For a similar apotropiasmo/s, Is ai equals gas agri/ as see the commentators on Macer. Roman 3:59 Diogen, v. 49 cf. N no sun regarded as a daimon, fasci/n, Is ai equals gas tree/psi philoster, her. 179 8ks. Rubbing off of the impurity was effected also with the dead bodies of puppies, ski/lair e circumflex /sku/laki, thphr, ch. 28. Those hagnismu equals dio/men were rubbed down with the bodies of puppies, which had been sacrificed to Hecate, parama/tetontai, and this is parascylakismo/s plu, q rom. 68, p. 280c. It was believed that these materials, wool and the skins of animals were also employed, received into themselves the harmful and polluting substance. This is why eggs are also used as katha/arja, e.g. in P. Maglond. N 121, L 522 app. Kenyan, Greek papyri in BM. IP 101, 1893. gra slash phi to backslash onoma iso circumflex a backslash do slash o arenica backslash chi backslash toe equals henny backslash paracati slash rise, 6 pseudo backslash nktl, Morin Lomier Luster. Ed. 2 Zutph. 1700, p. 258 f. They were meant to absorb the impurity. Ainla slash mbananta backslash 2 equals paracatharth slash entos kaka, oct. P. Dacid. App. Clem. SDR. Roman 7 p. 844 p. Appendix Roman 6. Hecate and the Hecatica backslash fa slash smata, Gorgyra, Gorgo, Mormalike, Mormo, Babo, Jello, Impausa, etc. Hecate herself is addressed as Gorgo backslash chi backslash Mormo backslash chi backslash Mariner chi backslash Palo slash Morph. Him. App. Hip. RH. Roman 4 35 p. 102 67 ds. Shayar. 591 Roman 3 861 says of Hec. La slash Gedai chi backslash fa slash smot epip slash empain cf. Ur. Hell. 569 dchr. Roman 4 p. 73 mi p. 70 arn. H. Anti slash a, ta backslash calu slash mina heca slash tea, fa slash smata hecatica slash marin, v procol. 28 chi backslash paula slash kiss otter backslash metabas slash line to backslash I equals dosdio backslash chi backslash e slash empausin cale equals esti, hecate empausa also in R. Tajan, fr. 501, sh.r. ran 293 hesage, e slash empausa. Thus hecate is the same as Gorgo, Mormo, and empausa. Babo also is one of her names. H. Mag, p. 289 Abel. Babo probably identical with the Babo slash mentioned among other ch though slash neoi in an insker. From Paros, Ather slash Nayan, v. 15, cf. The male personal names Babo slash, Babe slash s. Babo slash can hardly be etymologically connected with Babo slash and unpleasantly familiar inherent, though the mistake has been repeated in Rosher myth, Lex. Roman 2 30-25. One does not see how a female daimon could be named after a male o slash Lisbos. The nature of Hecate makes it more probable that she got her name from bow slash the noise of the baying hound. Cf. Baku slash on p. Magpar, 1911. Babo 2 is elsewhere the name of a gigantic nocturnal specter. Orf, fr. 216 ab. Lob Agel. 823 elsewhere these epiclare slash says, or forms in which Hecate, Gorgo, Mormo, etc. appear, are found as the names of separate infernal spirits. Gorgu slash Ra, Ake slash Rontos Gunnar slash Apollo p. Theo equals an app. Stab, Ickle, I 49 p 419 15w. Cf. 1 5 3 Gorgo slash is probably only the shortened form of this daemon. She is alluded to as an inhabitant of Hades as early as Odd. L 634, in the kata basis of Heracles 2, 5, 12, ch thoni slash a Gorgo slash Ur, Ion 1053. Acheron, whose consort she is, must have been regarded as the lord of the underworld. We also hear of a mother of the underworld god, Inish, Ag. 1235, Cassandra calls Clytemnestra thur slash ausen ha slash idu mert slash ra. In this very striking phrase, it is impossible to take ha slash do in its generalized sense, as lob. Does Aj 3 p 292, and the whole phrase as merely metaphorical equals Ainamer slash Torah. Why Mert slash Ra in particular? And above all, what would be the point of Thur slash Ausen? Clytemnestra, of course, it goes without saying, is only metaphorically called the raging mother of Hades, i.e. a true she-devil. But the thing with which she is compared, from which the metaphor is taken, must have been a real figure of legend. In exactly the same way in Bais. Greek to equals endemo slash non-mer slash terror is a figurative expression for a wicked woman. See Kali slash m. Chi backslash Crusoro slash e circumflex 2579 ed. Lambros, cf. ib. 1306 to equals a nerary slash donma slash m mer. In German too, the asterisk devil's mother, or grandmother, or the devil's wife or bride are of frequent occurrence in a metaphorical sense. Grimm p. 1007, 1607. But in all these cases, the comparison invariably implies the existence of real legendary figures to which the comparison refers, and often enough in medieval and modern Greek folklore, these creatures actually occur. We may therefore conclude that the Thur slash Ausa ha slash Idumer slash terror was a real figure of Greek legend. Hades in this connection cannot be the god of the underworld, common in Homer and a regular poetic character elsewhere, the brother of Zeus and Poseidon. In that case, his mother would be Rhea, who certainly cannot be identified with the Thur/Ausa Ha/Idumare/Terror. In local mythology, there were numerous other underworld, 592 gods, any of whom might be loosely called Has/Iders, the word being used as a general name for such deities. But the raging mother of the underworld god has the most unmistakable resemblance to Hecate, who flies about by night on the wind, see above. Chapter Roman 9, p. 297f below. App Roman 7 Psyche equals S neku/Anmita Bakshu/Ausa, Rius, RH mus. 49, 181n compares her less well with the huntsman of Hades. It seems almost as if the two were identical. Local legend could quite well have made Hecate the mother of the underworld god, just as she was the daughter of Admetos or of Eubulius, i.e. of Hades. If she is the same as Mormo/cf. The hymn, App, Hip, RH, Roman 4:35, then she was also known to folklore as the foster mother of Acheron. This title is applied to Mormolu/Ka, Tyther/Nair of Acheron in Sophron Fr. 9 Kybal. But Mormo/ is simply the abbreviated form of Mormolu/Care, as Gorgo/ is of Gorgu/Ra, and cf. Also Mamo/H, and with metathesis of R, Mombro/Id, Mormal, is mentioned together with Lamia, Gorgo/ Ephia/El Terce as a legendary creature in SDR, P19 and C. Runken Tim. Lex, P179 FF, Mormolu/Kayan. Mormo/ also in plural, ho/spur, mormonuz peta/ria, fabu equals entai, zen, HG 4417H. Mormonuz, +/narratas di/monas, i.e. wandering, as in Hesiod, and like the Aranais in the Pythagorean su/embalon, and the alas/store, the unquiet and wandering soul whose name is derived from ala equals estiso lob. Paralip. 450. Besides this, we have Heka/Tas 2 in the plural. Luke, Phillips. 39 Fin. Perhaps only generalizing, Trisso equals n Hecado equals n p magpar, 2825 f e/empaus, with a /lai/dola, dp 725, etc., to say nothing of Gorgo/Ness. Mormo/ as a bogey to frighten children. Mormo /da/ne theok, Roman 1540 cf. Clairces Mormo, a theatrical piece, probably a farce. I'm. Eg. I. 125g. So too is the monster /Mia that kidnaps children, Duris Fr. 35 2 FHG, DS 2041 Heraclit, Inkard, 34 etc. Some details in Friedlander Darstel, AD Siteng 4 I 511F as a nickname Lamo/Shar, Ek 62. Mormo herself is called Lamia, Mormo equals Ester equals Skai /Lamias, Greg, NZ. App. Runken Tim Lex, P182A. With Mormo and Lamia Jello/ is also identified. Theok. Roman 1540, a ghost that kidnaps children mentioned already by Sappho Fr. 44 Zenob. Roman 3:3, etc. Carco/2 is the same as /Mia Hesich. Lamia is evidently the general name, see above, chapter Roman 4 n. 115, while Mormo, Jello, Carco, and even Impausa are particular Lamii, who also merge into one another. Just as Mormo and Jello coincide, so also do Jello and Impausa. Jello /I/Dalan Impu/Sers H. Impausai, Lamii, and Mormolikai the same, Philoster, Vap, 425 p145 16k. Impausa, who appears in continually changing shapes R, Ran, 289 ff, is seen by human beings at night, Nuctarino /and fa/smaher e/Impausa, v iskin in it. Philoster, Vap. 2, 4, but even more commonly at midday, like the Hecate of Lucian. Messermbri/ as Hotan toy equals Escatochom/ noise Enagi/ Zossen, Shar, Ran, 293. She is, in fact, the demonium meridianum known to Christian writers as Diana, Lob, Agel, 1092, Grimm, 1162. For devils appearing at midday, see Rochhalls, Glob UBR, I 67 ff. Manhart Ant, 593 Wald U. Felk. Roman 2, 135 f. Haberlin Z. Tischer, Valkerpsyche, Roman 13, 310 ff. Drexler in Myth. Lex, Roman 2, 2832 ff. Grimm, 1661. Hecate, insofar as she appears as an I/Dalan in the upper world, is identical with Emp, and with Borbo, Gorgo, Mormo, as well as Jello, Carco, Lamia. Ak, Tish. AR Roman 4, 828 Stesichoros, enter equals sku slash lair I slash dus tino backslash s lami slash as n sku slash lin thugate slash ra I equals nigh. Here Hec herself seems to be described as a kind of Lamia, for she was generally regarded as the mother of Scylla, e.g. by Acusilaus, 73b, 27 Vors. In the Hesiodic Iai, 172 RZ. And even in AR himself, who in Roman 4, 829, explains the Homeric Crates as merely a name of Hecate. The vagueness of feature and confusion of personality is characteristic of these ghostly and delusive apparitions. In reality, the individual names, in some cases onomatopoeic formations to suggest terror, were originally the titles of local ghosts. In the long run, they all come to suggest the same general idea and are therefore confused with each other and are identified with the best known of them, Hecate. The underworld and the realm of ghosts is the proper home of these feminine daimons as a whole and of Hecate too. Most of them, with the possible exception of Impausa, give way entirely to Hecate in importance and are relegated to children's fairy tales. In the case of Gorgyra, Gorgo, and Mormalike, Mormo, this fact is clearly attested. Lamia and Jello carry off children and also ruse from this life, like other daemons of the underworld, Keres, Harpies, Erinais, and Thanatos himself. The Lamii rise to the light from their underground lairs Lami slash, as Tina backslash s historu equals entes, the oldest writers of histories, Enhu slash lies kai backslash na slash pies, ekger equals s anim slash nas, dh thuk. 6. Impausa appears on earth at midday because that was the time when sacrifice was offered to the dead. R. Ran, 293, sacrifice to heroes at midday. Above, chapter Roman 4, n9. She approaches the offerings to the creatures of the lower world because she herself is one of their number. In the same way, the chthonic character of the Serens they are closely related to the Harpies is shown by the fact that they too appear like Impausa at midday and oppress sleepers, etc., according to the popular demonology. See Crucius, Philol. 50, 97 ff. Appendix Roman 7. The hosts of Hecate cause fear and sickness at night. I/T/E/Nupnunfa/Entasma Faber equals Chthoni slash as TH, Heka/Ters co equals Moned/So, Trag. Insert, FR. 375 Porson suggested ish. They form the Nukti/Fant, pro-polyinodias your, hell, 570. These pro-polyta equals Stheu equals are probably also referred to in the Defixio sig. 5773, Wunsch tab. Defix, P. Ixp. They are nothing else than the restless souls of the dead wandering in the train of Hecate. Nocturnal terrors are produced by Heka/Ters epibale /Hero/Ani/Fade, HP, Morb, Sacker. Roman 6, 362L, hence Orf. HI 1 calls Hecate Psyche equals as Neku/Ami/Tabakshu/Ausen. The souls which thus wander about with Hecate are 594, in part those of the /Ori, i.e. of those who have died before the completion of their destined period of life, pri/NY equals ran exer/Cain by O, Soph Ant, 896, cf. Freinish. In Ob, 2422 and pro/Moiros Harpiger/Insker. Cos, 322. Thanatos has acted unjustly towards them and Takuter equals Tai by Opau/on Neoer/Likas Acma/S, Orf. H87, 56. The period of conscious existence on earth which they had left incomplete they must now fulfill as disembodied souls. An immatura mort preventas, animas, eo usc vagari istic, donic reliquatio completer etatum quas tum pervixiscent, si non intempestive obiascent, tert. N 56. They haunt the place of their burial. Hair/rose Attice equals S, hoi /Ento equals day equals nigh to/po soon/chest, P magpar. 1408, cf. Sig. 5858b. For this reason it is often mentioned on gravestones and elsewhere your, Alc. 168f, as something specially to be lamented that the person there buried had died a/oros c epiger. Gr. 12, 16, 193 221, 221 2, 313 23, a/technos a/oros ** 236 2 and cf. 372 32, 184 3, sig. 5574 see also app. Roman 3 and chapter Roman 14 pt. Roman II N 155 a slash gam. Jello who herself parth slash nasau slash rose edelu slash terce then becomes a fa slash entasma, slays children and causes 2 backslash s toe equals nau slash ron thana slash 2s, Zenob. Roman 3 H, Jello slash. The souls of the a slash ore cannot rest but must continually wander. See plout. Most, 499. They ain slash mon I slash dalan e slash chance h hec, L15 orf, p 290 ob. Are the creatures which accompany Hecate in her nocturnal wanderings. The hymn, to Hecate, p 289 ob. Cf, p mag, par, 2727 ff. Addresses Hec, thus 10 ff. Du equals r hecca slash ter triode equals tie, puri slash pino, fa slash smat, e slash chausa, a slash gausa main. Hair slash t e slash lashes, dana backslash esme backslash and hadu backslash s, dana slash st fo slash dues. Chalpa slash st, epipampa slash s, and hecca slash tern c kalo equals suen apophthyme slash noisen au slash roys k slash tines hero slash on tha slash non agni equals oi slash t chi backslash main. But this position of t slash is a regular Hellenistic usage, occurs frequently in Auric. Sibyl, apades ktl. Thus the a slash ore became the typical haunting spirits katexacher slash n, just as in this hymn, are summoned with Hec. For unholy purposes of magic, so an a slash oros is sometimes expressly invoked in the depictions which were placed in graves esp. In those of a slash ore, see the instructions given in P magpar. 332 ff, 2215, 2220 f, P anastasy L 336 ff. 353. La slash go to equals au slash ro to equals chaota backslash 2 equals ton to n to slash pon, etc. Roman defixio Isaac. Edit. 1047 exorchi slash zo c, neku slash daemon a slash or, leaden tablet from Carth. BCH. 1888, p 299 tab. Defix, p Roman 16, cf. Also p magpar. 342 f 1390 ff. Paradote, the victim, au slash roys, leaden tablet from Alexandria RH. Muse, 937 L22, a lead tablet from Phrygia, BCH. 1893, p 251 has. Gra slash fopa slash entas 2 backslash esamoy backslash ante slash apoyu equals entas meta backslash to equals and au slash ron. Epa slash gathon sabai equals nan, etc. in the curses of Epiger. Gr. P 149, the hecca slash terce melai slash ners die slash moans alternate with a slash ore sumphori slash. See also stare at Amer. Athens, Roman II, 168. Everything that has been said of the a slash ore applies also to the biotha slash nat, or bi slash a term found in the magical papyri, cf. Also biotha slash natin nu equals ma p magpar, 1950. They are a special kind of a slash ore. They find no rest, see above, chapter V N 147, Tert, N 56-7, serve. A Roman 4, 386, quoting the Physici, cf. Also Heliod, 2 5 p 42, 20 ff. BK. A biotha slash natos who has thus been deprived of his life has to make special supplication for admission, 595, into Hades, Epiger gr. 625, cf. Verg, A Roman 4, 696 ff. Such souls become alas slash stores, wandering spirits, see above append. Roman 6 p 592 wandering of a biotha slash natos plu, sim. 1 Finally, the souls of unburied persons who have no share in the cult of the souls or home in the grave are also condemned to wander, cf. Yor. Hec 31-50, see above, chapter V p 163. The a slash taphos is detained and the slashta, soph ant, 1070 and wanders about the earth, ali slash ni yor, tro, 1083, cf. Tert, n 56. Hence the souls of these a slash taph could be forced to appear and answer the sorcerer, Heliod, p 177 15 ff. BK. Right Canditus manibus the wanderings of the soul cease, Plin, Ep. 7 27 11, Luke, Phillips. 31 Fin the art of the ma slash entis and of the cathar ter slash s and of the apoma slash k tria grau equals s plu, superst. 3 p 166a is supposed to keep off such nocturnal terrors. It is purification, precisely because it drives away such unholy beings. It is also a kind of katha/arsion that is employed when apomigdali/AI instead of to the dogs. Ath. 409d are thrown out and toy equals s ampho/doys genome/noise nuctarina equals s fo/boys harmodios of lepria app. Ath. 149c, i.e. to Hecate and her rout, which also appears as a pack of hounds. Appendix VIII. Disintegration of consciousness and reduplication of personality. In that period of extreme excitement, the Greeks must have had frequent experience of the abnormal, but by no means unusual psychical state in which a division of consciousness takes place and becomes apparent. The single personality splits up into two or more distinct centers of consciousness, and these give rise to two personalities, succeeding each other or contemporaneous, with a double will and a double intellect appearing in one man. Even unprejudiced psychological observers of our own time are unable to describe such phenomena, which appear spontaneously or produced experimentally in certain neuropathic conditions, except as a reduplication or multiplication of personality. A second self comes into being, a second center of consciousness following or by the side of the first and normal personality, which is generally unaware of the existence of its rival. Probably the most complete and cautious account of these matters is that given by Pierre Janet in L'automatisme psychologique, Paris, 1889. When such phenomena appear in conjunction with marked religious or spiritualistic tendencies, they are naturally explained in accordance with these intellectual preconceptions. The appearance in a man or woman of an intelligent will, unguided or unperceived by the normally dominant personality, is conceived as the entrance of a foreign personality into the individual, or as the expulsion of the real soul of the individual by such a demonic or spiritual visitor. Nothing, however, is commoner in all ages than the religious or spiritualist preconceptions that lead to such an explanation. And so, 596, what the Greeks called e/k stasis, or kate/chestai ektheou equals, has been a very frequent explanation of such mysterious occurrences from the earliest times and in the present day. It has appealed just as much to the person affected by such reduplication of personality as to those round about him, unless they have been scientifically educated. The actual experience of such phenomena is generally a fact. Fancy begins only with the explanation offered. For the Greeks, the Pythia was always the best known example of such possession of a human being by a foreign will or spirit which seemed to enter violently and from outside into the human individual, having little correspondence, as it usually happened, with the character or the intellect of the medium in his or her normal state of consciousness. The Sibyls, Bacchides, Ba/Kachoi, the seers and priests of purification, Epimenides, Aristeas, and so many others, were further cases of the ascent of the soul to the divine or the entrance of a god into the soul. It was inevitable that the idea of an immediate relation between the soul and the divine, and of the divine nature of the soul itself, should grow up in connection with such cases as these, and seem to be authenticated in them more than in any other way. Greece is not the only place where this has happened. Appendix IX. The Great Orphic Theogony. The information about a coherent Orphic theogony and anthropogony which has come down to us from the statements of Neoplatonic philosophers and their contemporaries is derived, as Lobeck very rightly concluded, from the entai equals s rhapsody/is orphicae equals s theologi/a, hair /n chi/hoi philo/soph, Dirmernu/ausen Damask. Prink. p. 380k. This last statement means that they were explained in lectures given by the heads of the Platonic school since the time of Syrianos, Orphicae /Sunosiai of Syrian. Procol, in Tim, 96b, Scholia of Proclus on Orpheus, Ikai /mer /ispas/sastas rhapsody/as, Marin, v. Procol. 27. Written commentaries were also published, more particularly in order to prove the symphony/and orph/pathego/rukai /pla/tonos. Syrianos wrote a book with this title, wrongly ascribed to Proclus by Suidas, see R. Skal on Procol. In RP, p5, probably the work of Sir Is n orph/theologi/ and is the source of Orph. FRR. 123-4. which are traced back in the Theosophy/A, section 50, to Suriano /SN equals S Hudu equals Poner/Masson. From Sir. Also probably comes the citation from Orpheus Enter equals Teta/Arter Rhapsody/Aib. Section 61. The older Neoplatonists before Surianos took little notice of the Orphica. Platinos gives no quotation at all, though perhaps an allusion in 4:3:12, see Lob. p. 555, Iamblichos quotes nothing from immediate acquaintance. Porphyrios, who read everything, gives a little frr. 114, 123 Euseb, from Porph. 211, and what he does give certainly comes from the Rhapsodii. In fact, 597, the Neoplatonics as a whole when they quote Orpheus from their own knowledge, and do not, for example, simply write Orpheus instead of Pythagoras. See above, chapter X and 9, use the Rhapsodii only, as Lobeck rightly maintains, p. 466. Abel did not realize this, to the detriment of his collection of the FRR. The title of the poem they used can hardly have been Theogony/A. This seems to occur as a title in FR. 188 Clem. Al from Oct. P. Klopper equals S. In FR. 108 it is only a description of contents. FR. 310 is spurious. In Suida's Gaisford's MSS, we do indeed read of a Theogony/A e/pair as, but the figure indicating the number of lines corresponds most suspiciously with that of the previous onomastico/n, and in any case would be insufficient for the great length of the Rhapsody/AI. It seems extremely probable, as Lobeck already suspected, p. 716, 726, that the simple description, an Orphic poem divided into several rhapsodii, hieroi \low/goy and rhapsody/is kd, swayed, was the real title of the poem, which consisted of several rhapsody/ai. This hiero \s logos, the plural only means that there were several books, is, however, a different one. Lobeck missed this, p. 716, from the hiero \s lo/gos which epigenes, app. Clem. Al. Sdr. I. 21 p. 144p, attributed to the Pythagorean Kirkups, and again when swayed, attributes the 24 raps. To the Thessalian Theognetos or to Kirkups, he also means the old hiero \s logos not divided into raps, and confuses this with the later and much extended hiero \s logos. The older hiero \s logos is that alluded to by Sick, nd. I. 107 and prob also by Plu, SMP. 232 p. 636d fr. 42, the quotation in M. Fr. 44 from the 8th BK. Refers to the later hiero \s lo/gos, but it is certain that the hiero \s lo goes in 24 BKS. The poem possessed by the Neoplatonists, from which by far the greater number of our fragments are taken, was not a work of the 6th century, written, for instance, as Lobeck was inclined to think, 683 f. by Onomacretos. It is even untrue, regrettably enough we might add that, as the Neoplatonists presumed, and Lobeck believed in consequence, p. 508, 529 f, 602, 613, Plato knew and made use of the Rhapsodies. This emerges with particular plainness from Grupp's study of the question in J.B. Philol. Sup. Romans 17, 689 ff. And when this is gone, no other evidence for the earlier date of the Orphic theogony in this form is left. And in the very few passages in which a real coincidence, and not a doubtfully assumed one, exists between the Rhapsodies and Pherecydes, Heracleitos, Parmenides, see Lob. p. 532, Kern Theogon, p. 52, Grupp, p. 708, or Empedocles, the poet of the Rhapsodies is the borrower, not the creditor. The age in which he lived cannot be precisely determined. The fact that Neoplatonic writers are the first to quote him does not settle the question. It is uncertain whether he lived after, as I think, or before the otherwise unknown Hieronymus, whose statement about an Orphic theogony is quoted by Damask. Prink. 381 FK. In any case, Grupp, p. 742, has correctly appreciated the character of the bulky poem, equaling, or even surpassing the length of the Iliad, when he says that it consists in the main of a loosely connected patchwork of older Orphic tradition. 598, there are many points in which agreement between the Rhapsodies and older Orphic teaching and poetry is still demonstrable. Lines from older Orphic poems were taken over unaltered. Subjects from older Orphic theogonies were combined, sometimes without regard for their divergent character. Different versions of the same motif occur together. Thus we have the coda/posis, modeled eventually upon Hesiod, twice over. In the first version, Zeus swallows Phanes, in the second, the heart of Zagreus. Both mean the same thing. The devouring of the heart of Zagreus may perhaps belong to the older Orphic legendary material, the devouring of Phanes to the later. The personality of Fa/Nerse, however, cannot have been unknown even to the older stratum of Orphic poetry. DS1 11:3 quotes a line of Orpheus, which certainly was not taken from the Raps, in which Fa/Nerse is mentioned and identified with Dionysos, and in a gold tablet folded up with the tablet bearing an inscription of Orphic character, Psyche, edit. 642, and found in the same grave near Sybaris, there occurs, in addition to other illegible matter, a list of divine names which includes that of Fa/Nerse, and also Proto/Ganes, here apparently distinguished from Fa/Nerse, with whom this figure of Orphic theology is generally identified. C. Comparetti, Notisi degli Scavi di Anticita, 1879, p. 157, 1880 p. 156. This establishes the existence of this figure of Orphic mythology as early as the 3rd cent. BC. The prob date of these tablets. We may therefore employ the facts derived from the Rhapsodies with some confidence for the reconstruction of Orphic poetry and doctrine at those points, at least, in which coincidence with older Orphic teaching and the fantastic creatures of Orphic theology can still be proved. I leave these remarks exactly as they stood in the first edition of this book, for they still fully correspond to my own opinion. Others in the meanwhile have expressed divergent views, esp. Gompers, Greek thinkers, p. 539. But that Grupp's proof of the fact that Plato did not know the Rhapsodist Theogony is wholly unsuccessful, is something which no one has yet sought to show upon intelligible grounds. Until such a disproof is forthcoming, the belief in the early date of the Rhapsodies has no real ground on which to stand. Appendix X. Previous Lives of Pythagoras, his descent to Hades. Pythagoras' miraculous power of remembering what had happened long ago in previous lives seems to be already alluded to in the lines of Empedocles 430 ff. M equals Fr. 129d. The legend in which it was related how Pythag showed that he had once been Euphorbos, the son of Panthus, who had been slain by Menelaus in the Trojan War, must, at any rate, have been put forward at an early period. The story is often told or alluded to, DS10 613, Shv 599 on R28 Max, Tier 16 I 287 FR, Porf, VP, 26-7 Iamble, VP, 63 Philoster, VAP, 111874 Her, 17 P 192 23 FF, Ks Tation GR, 25 Hor, C1 2810, OV, M15 160 FF, Hide. 112, Lact, Inst, 31815 CF, also call FR, 83A, completely misunderstood by Schneider, who even calls Pythag Euphorbos as Hor, does and Luke, DM, 23. The story is always told in such a way as to imply that no intermediate *** and */sis of his soul had taken place between Pythag himself and Euphorbos. They are definitely excluded in Luke. Gaul. 17. Why was Euphorbos in particular selected? The fact that through his father Panthus he had a special connection with Apollo, like Pythagoras, a true sucher /Apolloniacaire / cf. Also Luke, Gaul. 16, can hardly have been sufficient reason as Gödeling Opusk. 210, Krish Sock, Pythag. 67 F suggest. Euphorbos was taken up and made one of a whole series of previous incarnations, Aethalides Euphorbos Hermetimos Pyros the Delian Fisherman Pythagoras by Heraclides Pont. DL Roman 8, 4-5 with which agree Hippol, RH. 1-2 P12 54 FDS. Porf, VP 45 Tert, and 28-31. Soph L. 62. Starting with Aethalides, to whom Heraclides was perhaps the first to ascribe the gift of miraculous memory, in addition to other miraculous powers. The power of Anna/M Nerses in life and death was transmitted through all the links in the chain down to Pythag himself. The story of the shield of Euphorbos was now transferred to Hermotimos for obvious reasons. According to D.L. Heraclides Phairsi, \n peri /hodu equals ta / de la /jane to \n pathago /ran. It is very possible that the language is here inexact and Heraclides did not, as the words of D.L. would strictly suggest, appeal to a statement of Pythagoras in a book, but represented him as saying all this in a dialogue. If this is correct, apart from the incarnation as Euphorbos which he took over from the tradition, Heraclides invented all the rest according to his own fancy. The fable was then taken up with variations by others. Inch, A.R. I. 645, 2 versions derived from the fiction of Heracle, but diverging in some points are mentioned, one being supported by hoi Pythagorikoi / the other by Pythagoras himself in a book. Pathago / ras Phairsi / n are the actual words. What Gellius 4, 11, 14 has to say on the authority of Clearchos and Dikyarchos differs, except in the matter of Euphorbos, entirely from Heraclides, and the names given should not be altered. But it may, nevertheless, be essentially the same fable over again, this time in the form of a parody of Heracle, which is not very likely in the case of Clearchos, but suits Dikyarch very well. Encouraged by these predecessors, Lucian in the Cock, 1920, carried still further the parody of the fabulous tale. The story of Heraclides seems to be seriously used in the Grapher / in which Pythagoras auto / s Phairsi hepta / chi /dr on edo equals nxai / dio perigegener equals esti es anthro / pus dl Roman 8, 14. As Dial's Archive, F. Jesh. Philos. Roman 3, 468 f shows to be very probable this was in the P.S. Pythagorean book written in the Ionic dialect, not before the 3rd century and divided into 3 parts which D.L. quotes and makes use of Roman 8, 6, 9, 14, cf. Also P.L. RP. 600b, 600 Pyth. Here states that he appears on earth from the underworld every 207 years, and the calculation may possibly be based on the series of lives invented by Heraclides and the chronology of Apollodoros, in which case it could not be before the last century B.C. Thus, Pythag, born 572, Pyrrho 779, Hermotimos 986, Euphorbos 1193, in the first year of the Troika / Ac. To Eratosthenes and Apollodor. Aethalides 1490. It must indeed be admitted that this method of reckoning makes the gross error of calculating from birth to birth instead of from the death of A to the birth of B. Other intervals are given in Theologum. Arithum. P. 40 ast 216 equals 63. DL Roman 8, 14 should not be altered to suit this as I once proposed. Schburn. Lucan Roman 9, 1, P 289, 12 us, 462. An error for 432 equals 2x 216. Cf. Theol, Arith, p. 40, 30, the existence of a Pythagorean writing belonging to the period before Heraclides in which these previous lives of Pythag were mentioned cannot be certainly proved. It might be supposed, as I once supposed, R.H. Muse, 26, 558, that the conjunction of the legend of Pythagoras' previous lives with the descent of P to Hades, which appears in Sh. Soph. L. 62 and Turt. N. 28 is ancient and original, in which case the previous lives would have been described in a Pythagorean kata basis, is ha/do. But the conjunction is quite arbitrary and is not such as would be likely in a Pythagorean book on the descent. The descent is, in fact, told as a parody, the form which had been given to it by Hermippos, and with the implication that it is untrue. Nor is it very likely that the previous lives would be described in connection with a descent to Hades, considering that Pyth remembered them while alive on earth and not in a condition of ecstasy, and did not learn of them in Hades. It would be more natural that, vice versa, an account of the previous lives should also include something about ta / and ha/do the on a /m nerces included that also. Cf. DL Roman 8, 4 fin. See the decisive objections to my previous view raised by G. Edig, Ecruntica, Lapes, Stud, 13, 289f. This applies equally to the view of Dial's Archive, p. 469, that Heraclides, in his work p to equals n and ha/do, told of the previous lives of P in connection with the descent of P to Hades, and that Heracle was the first to make P go down to Hades. There is nothing to prove that Heracle did this or to make it even probable. Without any 601 grounds for doing so, Dials supposes that what Pythagoras ac. Tish Ambrose, on a 371, Pharisee/n, e/zogeno/menos 2 equals so /mottos acir /coem/lose harmonias, was said by Pythag, not in a book going under his name, but in a dialogue by Heraclides, who is not even mentioned in that schol. There is no reason at all to doubt that these words, as Lobach supposed, 944, came from a book ascribed to Pythagoras himself, in which he described his ecstasies and ecstatic visions, cf. Arist, 496b, 1f, 13ff. Br. There is no further definite evidence for the existence of such a Pythagorean kata/basis, isha/do, for the grapher/ of DL Roman 8, 21, has another and better interpretation, as already remarked. But a fairly early date for the origin of at least a legend about a descent of P to Hades, and of quite definite statements about it with a propagandist aim, is attested by Hieronymus of Rhodos App. D.L. Roman 8, 21. But we should not without more definite reason ascribe the invention of the fable itself to Hieron, as is done by Hiller Hierer, R.H. Frag, p. 25. What reason could Hieron have had for inventing anything of the kind? Further, the lines of the comic poet Aristophan App. DL Roman 8, 38, already suggest that such legends were in existence in the 3rd century B.C. Whether the work on the subject of Pythagoras' descent to Hades called forth the legend, or whether the legend was already current and called forth the book, must remain undecided. But in any case, the book included no account of the previous lives of Pythagoras. These, apart from the older legend of P and Euphorbos, were first put forward by Heraclides Pont. But not the descent of P to Hades. 1/A10. What Dials, Parmenides, p. 15, 1897, says in support of his view might stand if we were willing to ignore the fact that Pythag, as has already been remarked, remembered his previous lives while he was still alive, and not in the ecstatic condition not e/zo/geno/menos 2 equals so/mottos. But this is a fact, so that Dial's view remains untenable. I cannot see what there is of a rationalist character, Dials, in the fact that Pyth saw Hesiod and Homer in Hades undergoing punishment. Anth, ho equals ni equals pon peri /theo equals n, DL Roman 8, 21. This is, in fact, an anti-rationalist priestly invention, and so I see Diodarich also understands it, Nicaea, 130. This fact certainly does not tell against the view that the Hades poem had its origin in the 6th, or the first half of the 5th, century BC. Appendix XI. Initiation, considered as adoption by the god. The mist whose soul is speaking in the first of the gold tablets found at Sybaris Dials, number 18 says L7-8. Heimer 2 equals D, ep/ban Stephanu equals posi /carpali /moisi, disboy /nasty, hupo /co /elpani /dun thoni as basile as. This hupo /co /elpani dun can hardly mean anything else than, I seek, as hike/terse, the protection of her maternal bosom or lap. It would certainly be attractive to take this with Diodarich to him, Orff, p. 38, as referring to a symbolical act corresponding to the ceremony in which in Greece and elsewhere, the adoption of a boy, his reception into a new G/nos, was symbolically represented. DS 439-2 in particular records the process. See Wesseling's Learn note there cf. Also Preller gr. Mythal, 4i 702. But such a symbolical proceeding, if it was to bring about the association of the mu/stairs with the goddess, must have taken place already in the O/Argia, once held upon earth. Here, we are in Hades. And it is, to say the least of it, difficult to believe that this di/Elkestai 2 equals ko/Elpu can have been supposed to occur in Hades in the neighborhood of the goddess herself, a fact which made a merely symbolical act of the kind, supposed quite 602, unnecessary. Apart from this, the views of Diodarich are quite sound. The ceremony was essentially regarded as an adoption of the mu/stairs by the goddess or the god, as a reception of the initiated into the divine G/nos. The Dra/Con, who represents the god himself, Dielko/menos 2 equals ko/Elpu in the Sabasia, seems actually to have had this meaning. Further, the mu/stairs is sometimes called Renatus, or in Eternum Renatus, Apol. M. Xi, 21, Sil. Roman 6, 510, 736. The day of his initiation is his natali sacer, a pul. Emsi 24, where natalum sacrum should be read. In these circumstances, we may venture to recall that the above-mentioned solemn rites of adoption also represented a new birth of the Theto/S Huio/S from the womb of his new mother. CDS-LC hence Hera is called the Dute/Ra-Teku equals Sav Heracles whom she adopted. Lycoffer. 39, and hence also the adopted is called Deutero/Patmos, i.e. reborn, as v adfin. This conception also provides the simplest explanation of the fact that the mu equals n, who has received the ni/os mu/stairs into the divine g/nos to which he himself already belongs, can be called the pater or parens of the mu/stairs, a pul. Emsi 25 tert, a pul. 8 adnat. I7, he effects the entrance of the new member into his own family. In Greek, the name for such a mystic father seems to have been patramu/stairs, sig. 3173, 3195. This conception of a new birth by initiation reminds us of the Christian idea of rebirth by baptism, which in its turn is developed from older Jewish ideas. See Anrich, Ant, Mysterienwesen, p. 111, n. It is nevertheless one which the Greeks themselves had at an early date. The mu/stai of the Eleusinian seem to have been not far from regarding initiation as an adoption into the divine g/nos. In the P.S. Platonic Axiachus, p. 371d, we read in the description of the cho equals rose eusibo equals n. And tau equals thatoi equals s memerum/noise st/ tis prodria kai /tas hosi/ us hagisteas kake equals c suntalu equals c. Po equals su equals enosoi /proto me/testi ter equals s timer equals s. O/nti gener/ter to equals n theo equals n. Chi /2 /s peri /heracle/at. Perhaps de/ would be better. Chi /dio/nusin catio/entas, isha/idu pro/teranlo/gos entha /de at Athens. Merther equals ni chi /to /tha/r sauce ter equals sek equals siporias per /ter equals s elusini /ezenau/sasti. Here Exiachos, for it is to him that Socrates is speaking, is plainly described as gener/ters to equals n theo equals n simply and solely because he belongs to the memaerm/noi. According to Wilamowitz, Gott. Gel, Ants. 1896, p. 984, he is called gener/ters to equals n theo equals n only as a member of the g/nos of the eupatri/di to which he apparently belonged. But that anyone just on the strength of the by no means uncommon fact that he belonged to a g/nos that happened to trace its earliest origin from a god, nor is it certain even that the eupatri/di did this. That anyone on this account should have dared to call himself a member of the same family as the gods is to say the least of it difficult to parallel. In this case, at any rate, nothing of the kind can be meant. From the general principle that the initiated have a prodry/a in Hades, it is deduced, simply as conclusion from premise, with a surely then, po equals su equals nu, that Axiachos too may hope to enjoy this same honor, ter equals s timer equals s. It is then entirely impossible that, to account for this hope, a reason 603 should be implied and expressed which, like the supposed descent of Axiachos from the gods, had nothing to do with the mysteries and the privileges of the mu/sti. If it was the alleged descent of Axiachos from the gods which secured him Timer/ in Hades, it would be quite meaningless to accompany the mention of the Timer/ thus secured to Axiachos, with an allusion to the Timer/ obtained on quite different grounds by the memaerm/noi, which yet is mysteriously equivalent to that obtained by right of birth. This allusion, moreover, is put in such a way that it quite unambiguously includes the special case of Axiachos in the common denomination of the memaerm/noi, of whom he is said to be one. The fact, indeed, that the privileges of the memaerm/noi is the only subject alluded to throughout is shown also by the third and last sentence. The famous cases of the initiation of Heracles and Dionysos are only mentioned as emphasizing still further the importance of Myrther equals nigh for those eyes, ha/ducatio/entas. Here then Axiachos can only be called gener/ters, to equals N theo equals N insofar as he is memaerm/nos. Why, indeed, he pro equals tos, before other memaerm/noi, should have a claim to the honor of prodria is something that our text does not say, and that can hardly be extracted from it. It certainly appears that Axiachos has a special privilege beyond that of other Mistai. Had he reached a specially high stage of the T/layer, which was not open to everyone, and at which kinship with the gods was first fully assured? Did the family of the Eupatri/Dai undertake some active part in the Mu/Erses, which gave them a closer relation to the gods? In any case, his claim to be regarded as gener/ters to equals N theo equals N must have depended on his having been initiated at Eleusis. Now this kinship with the gods to which he thus attains can only be made intelligible if, in accordance with the analogies adduced above, we regard the Mu/Erses, or perhaps only its highest stages, as a symbolic adoption by the divinities, suggesting or representing entrance into the divine G/nos. No one will maintain that gener/ters to equals N theo equals N is a very unnatural phrase, will. For one who has been adopted by the gods, who will recall the fact that at Athens the adopted person was inscribed as 2\s gener/tas of the adopter is 7, 13, 15, 17, 43, or which is precisely the same thing, is 2\s sugene equals s of the adopter is 7, 27, 1. Thereby he becomes himself gener/ters of the members of the G/nos into which he thus enters. He is now their gener/ters, or, as it is once expressed in an absolutely equivalent phrase, their sugener/s kata /n poi/ersin, 44, 32. Thus the fully initiated is gener/ters of the divine family, kata /n poi/ersin. Appendix Roman 12. Magical exorcisms of the dead on late kata/desmoi, phimitica/ etc. Invocations and conjurings of a /ore and other necudai/ moans of an earlier period are mentioned above p. 594f. To a later period belong 604, the depictions found at Cyprus, Curian, and edited in the Proc. Of the Soch. Of Bible. Archaeology, p. 174 ff. The depictions are there called parathere equals chi, phimiticai /2 equals entidai/ku, I, 39 and frequently, or phimitica /kadath/mata, Roman 4, 15, etc. Phimu equals n and phimitico/n in this rude Egypto-Syrian Greek are equivalent to the terms, otherwise usual for such magic charms, katade equals n, kata/desmos, see above, chapter Roman 9n, 107. See also p. Maglond. Kenyan Greek pap. In BM, p. 114, L 967 ff. In an appeal to a god, du equals rho/moi chi phi/masen, hupo/taxon, katadu/lawson tuen day equals nato equals day equals ni ktl. Ib, p. 97, L 396 ff. Phimitico / chi hupidictico / n geni equals on chi ka/tachos. Labo / lubin apo /sacrafo /ru salir equals nos poi /ersinla /mnan chi epi graph chaco equals graphe o circumflex. Bronze is a magic metal. Hos hupo chi equals tai, chi the s para a /oran, see above. p. 594f. Here follows the rest of the barbarous texton. These Cypriot depictions among the other invocations regularly appear those addressed to the souls of the unquiet dead, to the die/moans palua/endrioi, Roman 6, 17. Adds pepilekismi/noi chi eastorum/noi or escalopismi/noi? Cf. Luke, Phillips. 29. Chi biothos/nad, chi /a/ore, chi /a/pori taffer equals s, ter equals s hiera equals s taffer equals s Roman 4, 18, thus I 30f and frequently. The die/moans palua/endrioi were probably the souls of executed criminals whose bodies were thrown out into the common burial grounds as at Melite in Athens. Plu, Themist. 22. The palua/endria, cf. Parison. On ale, vh. 1221. Biothos/nad, I/tz/noi I/tento/pioi are invoked, Roman 4. 4 invocation is made in common to. 2 slash mb panda slash crute chi backslash ch though, slash neoithie backslash chi backslash heka slash ter ch thoni slash, a chi backslash hermer equals ch though, slash ni chi backslash plus slash ton chi backslash ernu slash is hupach though slash neoi chi backslash hume equals as hoi ho equals decado kerm slash noia slash or a chi backslash ano slash numi, crh. Muse. 50, 23. I 35, and frequently repeated with the same formula. What we have here is of frequent occurrence. A dead person is called upon to carry out a curse. An early example is Sig. 539, Catato equals auto u backslash s, the persons to be cursed, soy slash, honor slash Sime Attica, 4th century BC. The tablet in Bach, IP 487, admits the reading honor slash Sime as well as honor slash Simir. The latter, as a nominative, is preferred by Wunsch tab, defix. P. Iv, P25, N100, simply in order to expel every example of the invocation of a dead person to carry out a curse. But this is only a petitio principii. And if we accepted honorsi slash mer as the name of the cursor, at least the addition of some word like ego slash after auto u backslash s soy slash would be necessary, for which there is no room on the tablet. It will be necessary to retain the generally accepted vocative honor slash Sime, to which the coming pa slash n tas. Terre equals n, L58, is much better suited than to the following Hermer equals, L8, as in Wunsch's version. There is nothing remarkable in the invocation here of the individual nekudai slash mon by name, thus doubling the force of compulsion exerted. Cf. Kroll, R.H., Muse. 52, 345f, to complete and carry out the curse. Parallels are given above, p. 594ff, and in the above-mentioned Cypriot Phonetica slash, cf. Also Sig. 5858b, die slash moans chi backslash nu slash mata i.e. souls, n to equals to slash po 2 slash to therluco equals n chi backslash uranico equals n, exorki slash zo huma equals s. The custom of burying such magic defictions was astonishingly widespread. Defigi diris deprecationibus nemo non meduit plin, nh. 2819. In the places where Latin was spoken, such abominations were 605, indeed even more common than in Greek-speaking countries. The Latin defictions are collected now by Wunsch tab, defix, Roman 25f. The practice had a long life and is not quite dead even today. On the Roman side, examples from the 7th and 8th centuries are by no means rare. See e.g. Home de Sacrilege, section 20. For a Greek example, see e.g. the story App. Sophronius, SS, Syri et Ionis Miraculous Seek. Romans 6, chapter 55, p. 3625. Mean magical objects were buried under the doorstep of the victim's house, were discovered and dug up, whereupon the death immediately followed of not the victim but the magician. 12th August, 1897, equals 2nd German ed. Ch 6n20, apide slash new epide slash new n. 24 Muthaloge equals to Muthalogi equals Thai. Ch 7n12, sorbidiana sorbitiani n. 25. Ch 8p 266, ecstasy ecstasy n. 10d. Greich, d, jesh, d greich n. 27 perda equals n. 28 preserved n. 35 archibucolos n. 68 poverty stricken n. 70 to ta slash to n. 76 eudaimoni slash a eudaimoni slash e circumflex n. 77 ter equals nn. Ch 9p 285, solemnized p. 287 multitude n. 26 asphaltos a slash sphaltos n. 46 considebat n. 47 auto u equals auto backslash n. 54 eshu slash I isku slash in. 58 puthia slash sn. 60 819, 819 n. 109 ecstasy. Ch 10 n3 collegium n. 45 holu equals ho slash lu n. 47 apoca slash tasses apocata slash stasis n. 80 erlaut. Ch 11p 361 erlaut p. 387 wherever n. 1 omitted after 896 n. 19 v9 n. 36 prevented n. 99 regarded n. 119 opusk. CH12P 416 Subservience Subservience P. 423 Envelopes Envelops P. 424 Chophoroi Chophoroi N. 88 Haser ho ser. CH13 and 33 Originally N. 50 Energ tis uurg tis. CH14P 503 Stubbornness N. 1 Emancipation N. 47 AAC zo on zo o circumflex N. 53 Kalokant N. 59 Destruction. CH15P 544 Unadulterated N. 96 Descendants N. 116 Anthro /pu anthro /pon thomosome new thomosome no N. 174 Genitives. App2P 584 low P. 585 ruse lose. App3P 588 a mertoi almus erdai App5P 58999. Avor. App6P 591 Devils. App7P 594. App10P 598 Euphorbos P. 599 Ensamato /says Ensamato /sis.